Number 10. Dr. Strange. Dr. Stephen Strange was an accomplished and world-renowned surgeon until a tragic car accident. While he survived the crash, the nerves in his hands were severely damaged, making it impossible for him to recover well enough to return to his work as a neurosurgeon. Strange was egotistical to the point that he refused to do any other work in the medical community, attempting to use all of his funds to try and find a cure for his hands, and eventually sinking into a deep depression and alcohol addiction. Previous to his accident, it was his parents' death and the fact that he found great success early on that caused him to become materialistic in his pursuits, caring less and less for his patients and more about the acclaim and the money that he was making. Eventually, he heard of the mystical power of the Ancient One and used his last bit of money to set out to see if they might possess healing abilities strong enough to heal him. From there, he would become a reluctant, stubborn, and eventually extremely loyal and determined student, and would go on to become the new Sorcerer Supreme and magical hero known as Doctor Strange. Number 9. Iron Man. Tony Stark has led quite the privileged life, basically being born with a silver spoon in his mouth, so you might think he's got it made when it comes to superhero origins. But let's not forget what it took to get him to build and operate his Iron Man suit, and what inspired him to become a hero. Tony Stark was giving a demonstration of his technology to the military when there was an explosion. Stark was injured and taken prisoner by a terrorist who wanted to use his brilliant mind to have him create weapons for them. Shrapnel lodged into Tony Stark's chest moved ever closer to his heart, and it was the help of another brilliant prisoner, Nobel Prize winner, and physicist Ho Yinsen, whom Stark admired, that allowed Tony to survive and inspired him to build the Iron Man Mark I armor, which allowed him to escape but at the cost of Yinsen's life, and put him on the path to becoming a hero. Number 8. Rocket Raccoon. Rocket Raccoon in the Marvel Cinematic Universe alludes to his character's dark origins when he gets into an argument with the other Guardians of the Galaxy, insisting they consider him to be a joke, and revealing that there is a lifetime of pain in his past which gives him the form and personality that he has today, as a being who was heavily experimented on, being torn apart and put back together more times than he can count. Previous to this origins though, in the comics, Rocket was simply one of a group of animals given heightened intelligence and awareness by robotic beings, who sought to escape their duties of looking after mental patients in their care. Rocket was one of the animals who stepped in to take on these duties. Later on, however, even in the comics, while out exploring space, he would be abducted and taken to a place known as Lab World, where he was then studied and experimented on. Number 7. Two-Face. Harvey Dent went from being on the side of the law and one of the biggest real-life everyday fighters for justice in Gotham to becoming one of the city's most iconic villains. It all started when he was disfigured. During a trial, crime boss Sal Maroni threw acid in Dent's face, scarring him for life and driving him insane. Dent lost his faith in justice as a result of this incident, and instead left it up to fate to decide whether he would behave heroically or criminally, often known for flipping a coin to decide his victim's fate. Number 6. Spider-Man. Spider-Man's whole brooding and moody sensibility and his battle with depression, which would only grow over time, all stems back to his origins. The death and loss of Uncle Ben is what inspired Spider-Man to become a hero and also gives him a lifetime of weighty regret. Uncle Ben's death could have been avoided in Spider-Man's mind if only he'd cared enough to use his powers to stop a thief in his path, who would shortly after end Ben's life. To Peter Parker, he may as well have pulled the trigger himself. This tragic and dark story would inspire the hero to use his powers more responsibly, but would also haunt him for the rest of his life. Number 5. Dr. Manhattan. John Osterman's origin story as Dr. Manhattan is truly horrific. John found himself trapped inside a test chamber when he went to retrieve his watch, as it underwent a scheduled experiment. The experiment caused John to be taken apart at an atomic level, removing his intrinsic field, which is a term used in Watchmen to describe what holds atoms together, the force that does that. It's not actually a true scientific term, fun fact. As such, he was granted powers over the intrinsic fields of all things, using his powers to build himself a body 3 months later and physically manifesting in the cafeteria of his workplace. John's life would be forever changed, and in becoming a god, he would not only look different, but would also become less human as the years went on, experiencing a detached feeling from life on Earth. Number 4. Batman. Bruce Wayne was just a young boy when he lost his parents. They were both killed point blank in front of him one night after the family had left the movie theater where they just watched Zorro and attempted to take a shortcut down an alley. A thief named Joe Chill killed them during a robbery, leaving Bruce alone in the world, save for the family butler, Alfred, who would become like a father to him. It was this tragic start to his life that caused young Bruce to grow up fast and run in with a bat that inspired him to become the Dark Knight of Gotham, known as Batman. It's also been argued countless times over that this traumatic event made young Bruce unstable, which is perhaps why he has turned to a life of vigilantism, unable to heal the mental wounds his parents' tragic deaths caused. Number 3. Gamora. Gamora is the last surviving member of her race, known as the Zen-Huberis. They were a peaceful people who were all killed by a religious order when they resisted their attempt at dominance in the galaxy. Thanos managed to save Gamora and raised her as his daughter, turning her into his own weapon, modifying her with tech to grant her superhuman abilities. He planned on using her to defeat the villain known as Magus, who was also Thanos' enemy. While Thanos seemed to occasionally show Gamora fatherly affection, there would come a time when she would turn on him, acknowledging him as someone who had used her for his own means and denouncing her allegiance to him, seeing him for what he was, a mad tyrant and a villain who was selfish and cold-hearted, seeking only to bring death to whatever planet, galaxy, or universe he was in. Number 2. Raven. If we go back to the original New Earth continuity, Raven's origins are pretty freaking dark. Her mother was part of a cult, and when she tried to escape and leave, the members prevented her from doing so by summoning a powerful demon named Trigon. This demon then forcefully mated with her. From this, Raven was conceived. She was born Angela Roth and raised to control her emotions, to help prevent her from losing control of her demonic powers and to basically prevent her from giving into the dark side. She was sort of like a Jedi, but with a demonic heritage. When she learned of Trigon's evil plans, she attempted to stop him and sought help from the Justice League, who actually refused to help her because of her demonic heritage, prompting Raven to work harder to become a hero and putting her on a path to become one of the Teen Titans. Number 1. Spawn. Spawn was originally Albert Al Simmons, an assassin who was murdered by his friend while on a mission. He then is condemned to a life in hell, but makes a bargain to return to the land of the living so that he can see his wife one last time. However, he must agree to become a Hellspawn in order to do so. The unfortunate side effect of which, that he doesn't learn until later, is that he will forget his memories somewhat, so he returns to life, but only as a faint recollection of his past. And what's more, his body is still kinda undead, making him appear as a horrific monster. So even if he had remembered his wife's name straight away, he would not be able to reveal himself to her. When he finally does remember his wife, he discovers she is remarried to one of his friends, and they now have a daughter. He also realizes that 5 years have passed since his death. Not what he had originally expected when he made that bargain. Spawn, lost in the world, is now forced to search for a new purpose while also conserving his powers, as once they're fully used up, he will return to hell. Number 10. Swarm. If you have a fear of bees, or more specifically mutated killer bees, then you might find the story of Fritz von Meyer to be terrifying. Meyer became a sometime Spider-Man villain after his transformation into basically a horde of killer bees. He was a scientist in the employ of the German Axis forces during World War II. Not much is known of his backstory previous to that, but with unlimited funding, he set out to study poisons, toxins, and bees. Finding an apparently mutated hive of bees, he attempted to awaken their killer instincts and seize control of them. But his plan backfired, and they ended up gaining back their killer instincts and using them to swarm and kill Meyer. Meyer's consciousness, however, became absorbed into the bees as his physical form died, and as such, he is now a man who is made up entirely of bees. If that isn't something out of a nightmare, I really don't know what is. Number 9. Swamp Thing. Alec Holland is believed by Swamp Thing himself to be the man that the creature once was. Alec Holland and his wife were living out in the swamp and were both scientists who had developed a bio-restorative formula that would solve world hunger. However, goons were sent to sabotage and destroy the discovery during this original origin story. The goons put explosives in the lab, and Alec woke up following the explosion covered in the bio-restorative formula. He ran out into the swamp but found himself merged with it, becoming an avatar of the green, merging with that swamp and becoming the monstrous creature known as Swamp Thing. Originally in the comics, Swamp Thing, believing it had once been Alec, was always trying to find a way to return to a more human state, longing to be mortal once more. Number 8. John Constantine. We recently got got an interesting look into John Constantine's origins in the new DC Black Label limited series Rise and Fall. Hellblazer Rise and Fall. That's the whole long title. This is a story divided up and told over the course of 3 books. In the first book, we are told of Constantine's backstory and everything that has shaped him into the lovable troublemaker of an occult detective that he has become today. His life started in the dark from the moment he was born. His mother passed away, bringing him into the world, which set the stage for what his life would then be like. His father turned to drink and treated young John harshly, never once sympathizing with his son, which only motivated John to become more of a young vagabond, staying out and running around the streets of London late at night. We also learn of the tragic loss of one of his childhood friends in the book. Truly, it's a must-read for Constantine fans, or just for fans of good comics. Number 7. Batman. The death of Batman's parents and the trauma he suffered from witnessing that as a young boy would forever change Bruce. It would turn him into the vigilante he is today and inspire him to set out on a mission to become the Dark Knight, dedicating his life to an intense training regimen and traveling the world to learn from a variety of masters on a variety of subjects, from detective work to martial arts to magic. To this day, it's still the death of Bruce Wayne's parents that remains one of the most tragic events in his life, still haunting him to the point that he's even seen hallucinating about his parents' death while tripping on Joker venom during the current events of Joker War. Always tends to be the thing he comes back to. That and currently the loss of Alfred. Number 6. Sentry. Robert Reynolds was a drug addict who snuck into a lab and discovered the experimental Golden Sentry serum, though the backstory he'd be given in the comics within the Marvel Universe later on would be much less dark. Consuming the serum granted Reynolds gained the power of 1,000,000 exploding suns, making him one of the most powerful superheroes ever known. Although the Sentry was a hero who was known for his Superman-like extreme level of goodness, he had a dark secret, one that was unknown even to him for a very long time. Bob Reynolds suffered from a split personality disorder, in part brought on by the villain Mastermind's manipulations, which meant that he was not only capable of immense good, but immense evil as well, as his personality split into that of the superheroic Sentry and the powerful supervillain known as the Void. When it was revealed that Bob himself was also the greatest villain on the planet, he recruited the help of his superhero friends such as Doctor Strange and Mr. Fantastic to help everyone, including Bob, forget about the Sentry, so that the Void would also never return, making Bob, for a time, the greatest hero that the world forgot. Number 5. Rorschach. Walter Kovacs was raised by a mother who mistreated him, basically resenting his very existence. This mistreatment inspired Walter to stand up to those who would hurt others. These beliefs led to Walter himself to brutally confront his own schoolyard bullies, even going so far as to blind one of them as a child. Walter became a sociopath because of how he was treated when he was younger, believing in a strict moral code and using that as his own vigilante compass to decide who should be punished and how severely. His mother was a prostitute, and when he learned of her death at the hands of her pimp, who force-fed her Drano to kill her, he only responded with one word: good. Ooh, dark. Number 4. Jessica Jones. In the Netflix Jessica Jones series, we learn that Jessica Jones became a detective and hero in essence because of the fact that she was assaulted and mind-controlled by Purple Man, who made her to do all sorts of things that she didn't want to do. In the Alias series, Jessica Jones attempts to confront her trauma, wrestling with just how much control Kilgrave actually had over her, and if it's possible that part of her motivation for all of the things he had her do could have actually come somehow from within herself. This is a common thing with victims of this type of assault, wondering about how much responsibility or control you actually had in that situation, and in a sense blaming yourself for what happened to you. But beyond this, Jessica Jones's original origins, how she got her powers, actually involved a massive vehicular collision, where her entire family was killed except for her. And it's implied that she only survived because she was exposed to radioactive materials, whose containers were damaged in the accident, leaking out and interacting with Jessica. Jessica's original last name had been Campbell, and she didn't get her name Jones until she was later adopted by Alyssa Jones and her husband, after Jessica's family's death. Ugh. Actually, Jessica seems to be a bit of a cursed name in the Marvel Universe. There's a lot of Jessicas with dark origins. Number 3. Magneto. Well known for a long time in the comics by his alias Eric Magnus Lenscher, Magneto's original name and origins revealed that he grew up as a young Jewish boy during World War II named Max Eisenhardt. His family left Germany when things started to get bad, retreating to Warsaw, where they lived in the Warsaw Ghetto. Eventually, Max was taken to the extermination camp at Auschwitz after he and his family attempted to leave the Warsaw Ghetto. Following his time at Auschwitz, Max shed his original name and adopted another so that he might better fit in with his wife Magda's Romani people. When it comes to Magneto's backstory, he is no stranger to discrimination, and it is his suffering and the suffering of others that he has witnessed that has inspired him to become the villain and the sometimes hero that we know today. Number 2. Red Hood. When it comes to Jason Todd's transformation from Robin to Red Hood, there was a ton of dark events that came into play here, which caused Jason Todd to go from hero to villain, and then of course to anti-hero. Todd was seemingly one of the permanent deaths in comics after he was beaten to near death by the Joker, following being sold out by his own birth mother, who he then even still fought to free before being killed in an explosion. We thought we'd never see him return, but he was later brought back using the Lazarus Pit, and then was trained by Dukra of the All-Cast and joined the League of Assassins for a time. When he finally returned to Gotham, it was originally as the villain Red Hood, seeking brutal justice, and later on, as Joker would say in Three Jokers, Book 1, becoming one of his own villainous creations. Ooh, so dark. When you realize you've become a thing you didn't want to be and someone evil made you that. Eee. Number 1. Wolverine. Wolverine has more trauma in his life than all the X-Men put together. Actually, he's probably got more trauma in one pinky than all of the X-Men. The only thing that protects Wolverine from the darkness of his own multi-chapter tragic origins is the fact that his brain actually also uses his healing factor to basically rid him of undesirable or painful memories. Young James Howlett's powers first manifested when his birth father killed his foster father, the husband of his mother. In a rage, James used his bone claws to kill his birth father, Thomas Logan, and his mother, still recovering from the loss of her firstborn son, severely traumatized, then took her own life. There are a lot of things that came after that when it comes to Wolverine's story and his past, pretty much all of them being wrapped up in some kind of traumatic experience. Number 10. Norman Osborn. Norman Osborn wasn't always a villain, but many things in his life shaped him to become the greedy, insane, and focused, iconic Spider-Man nemesis we know him as today. It all started when Norman was young. Hearing that his parents were having financial issues, he learned at a young age that it was important to look out for number 1 above all others, to ensure his own survival. Number 1 is Norman Osborn, by the way. His father mistreated him and was known as a failure, and this drove young Norman to strive to do better than his old man, striving for excellence in all things at any cost. When his wife died, it only served to inspire Norman to throw himself into his work even more. He cut out his business partner and began searching for formulas that he could profit off of, ending up discovering and creating the Goblin Serum, which made him smarter and stronger, but at the cost of his sanity. Number 9. Harley Quinn. More of a psychological horror story as well. Harley Quinn ended up losing her sanity and parts of herself in her love of the Joker. It was her love for him that drove her to a life of crime and made her the villain initially that she became. She's now since found a way out of this darkness, dumped the Joker, and even moved more towards becoming a hero, even teaming up with Batman as his newest sidekick. But you can't deny how dark her origins were. In the limited series Harleen, we get a more sexy version of her fall into a life of crime and a fall into her love for the Joker. But even that shows just how much Harley spiraled down into the beautiful and freeing pit of insanity with Mr. J. It also tells us a tale of her being trapped in Arkham Asylum during a breakout with various villains around every corner, and not all of them are friendly towards Dr. Quinzel. In the end, she is forced to choose between the two sides of herself and ends up shattering into complete insanity after killing a security guard who she kind of considered to be her friend, turning away from her saner persona of Dr. Quinzel and fully becoming and embodying Harley Quinn. I just love too that the panel is like literally her shattering. Number 8. Prince Zuko. Okay, so while this might not be a comic book character, I still find Zuko of Avatar to have one of the most traumatic and horrifying stories out there, and I also just like Prince Zuko, so I want to talk about it. Not only that, but he's just a great villain because a lot of the reasoning behind who he is also helps to justify what he does and makes him a better villain because of that. And that makes him a better villain. A great villain in my mind needs to have a motivation that you can actually connect with. Their need to do something that goes against every moral code that they have learned or that society has to feel justified to the point that you may even feel bad for them at times, or even find yourself rooting for them. After all, we aren't born villainous. It's usually a sense of injustice that makes us feel we have no other option but to break the rules, tear down the establishment, and question our own morals in order to get done what we need done. You have to be pushed to the brink to get to the point that you actually shift into a villain in reality, and Zuko definitely was that. A lot of what he does is out of wanting to win back his father's love, and because he is understandably afraid of his father as well. He became a villain as a result of his punishment at the hands of his father, where he was burned in a forced duel against him and then later exiled as well. Number 7. Carnage. Even before Cletus Cassidy was Carnage, he was terrifying, and the villain only has become more terrifying ever since then. Cletus was born into a family with a history of mental health problems, and from a young age it seemed as though there was always something off about him. It's like he was destined to become a villain. He showed all the expectant signs of becoming a psychotic, sociopathic serial killer, and, well, that's just what happened. He was raised by a woman who we can only assume was his grandmother, as his mother died seemingly from childbirth. He was also born in Ravencroft, so I feel like that is some kind of foreboding as to what type of child he could grow up to be. His supposed grandmother mistreated him while raising him, and he paid her back in kind by pushing her down the stairs. Yikes! From there, he went to live with a family who is believed to have been his biological father and his stepmother, though I don't think that's ever really confirmed. That also didn't end well. Roscoe, his apparent dad, mistreated him as well, and his stepmother ended up dead, caught in the middle of the conflict. Roscoe was arrested because of her death, and Cletus ended up at an orphanage. While there, he unleashed his wrath on fellow orphans and administrators, even killing a few outright, and eventually burned the orphanage to the ground. Seriously, this is just something out of a horror movie. Number 6, The Broken. I don't know why, but this villain's tale just always sticks with me for some reason. No matter what, I just think it's that initial panel of Batman's like head and torso together, which is like separated from the rest of his body, but suspended with like thick coiled wires, and he's in immense pain, that really does it for me. It just is like, I don't know, I just think it's so scary. The Broken is an alternate version of Batman who comes from the dark multiverse. He appeared in the retelling of Nightfall, where instead of Batman winning the day on his Earth, he lost in the fight to reclaim Gotham against Azrael, who he'd appointed as his replacement after Bane broke his back. Azrael won and became Gotham's protector, Saint Batman, and Bruce became his permanent prisoner. His limbs were removed from his body, but he was kept alive, just as like a head and a torso, kept in immense pain on what I assume is like a life support machine, but also kind of a torture device. He suffered intense migraines and seizures while kept this way. Eventually, he was freed by Bane's son and escaped Saint Batman, taking back Gotham, but this entire experience left him broken, turning him into an even worse villain than Saint Batman was. So he like reclaims the city, but you're like, oh no, oh dear. Not good. Number 5, Superman. Wait a minute, what? Superman isn't a villain. Well, not in the main continuity, but in the alternate reality of Injustice, he most certainly is a villain. How did this come about? Well, after Superman was tricked into fighting Doomsday, only to realize he had been made to hallucinate by the Joker and Harley, who used fear toxin on him. What had actually been happening was that Superman had been fighting Lois Lane, not his nemesis Doomsday. He realizes this all too late, sadly, as he discovers he has killed Lois. Not only that, but she was pregnant. And not only that, but the Joker and Harley had also tied a trigger for a nuclear explosion to Lois's heart. As a result, when her heart stopped, Metropolis, Superman's shining city, was blown to bits. It's really no wonder he became such a cold and deadly villain. He felt that he needed to fix the world as a result of these events. Of course, he went about that in a way that I'm sure Lois would not have been proud of had she still been alive to see Superman fight in her and Metropolis's name. Number 4, Killer Frost. Killer Frost was originally scientist Caitlin Snow, who had been on the hunt for a perpetual motion energy conducting machine that many believed to be a myth. She sought to continue the research of Dr. Louise Lincoln, who had been working to make such a machine, which she called a self-sustaining thermodynamic ultraconductor engine. Caitlin's colleagues warned her against following in Dr. Lincoln's footsteps, but she paid them no mind. When she finished the engine, they turned on her, revealing their true colors. They were actually working for the evil organization known as Hive, and sought to destroy Snow and Lincoln's work, preventing the invention from ever being used or discovered. They trapped Caitlin within the engine and started it up in order to destroy her. Terrified, Caitlin panicked and tore out the wires for the coolant system. This had an unexpected result, and Caitlin Snow found herself bonded with ice and basically became a heat vampire. With her new ice-based powers, she escaped and killed all of the Hive agents. Craving heat as a result of her condition, she would later discover that exposure to Firestorm's powers temporarily reverted her to normal and would dedicate her life to pursuing him, seeking a permanent cure. Number 3, Zombie Spider-Man. I know he's another alternate hero turned villain, but what can I say? They get some of the spookiest origins because they kind of have the most to lose. Heroes have usually higher stakes than villains. When it comes to Spider-Man's origins in the zombieverse, he was of course infected with the zombie virus, which made him a villain. But as this change came upon him, he found himself tragically and horrifyingly feeding on his own family members that he tried desperately for years to keep safe. Spider-Man started off his brain and flesh-eating spree by eating those he'd loved the most in a horrific twist. He devoured Mary Jane and his Aunt May, likely crying all the while, I imagine, but unable to stop himself. He was just so hungry. Number 2, Bane. It's really no surprise that Bane became a supervillain considering he grew up in prison, serving time for crimes he did not commit, but that his father committed. Bane's father was a revolutionary who had escaped the prison, and when Bane was just 17, he was imprisoned in his father's place. He spent most of his life inside a cell that was connected to the ocean. All day he would spend in mind-numbing seclusion, alone in his cell, and at night he would have to swim for his life while trying to stay afloat above the water that filled up his prison cell almost to the very top, but not quite. Crabs and leeches would cling to his body, cutting him throughout each tormented night, and insects who happened to be sharing the cell with him would climb up on his face, seeking refuge. Every moment he ever spent outside of his cell afterwards would be focused on becoming stronger and smarter, preparing himself to one day escape the prison and accrue power once outside its walls. Number 1. Magneto. One of the scariest stories out there in terms of supervillain origins is that of Magneto, made more scary by the fact that it's actually based off of real-world circumstances experienced by many victims of the events tied to World War II. Magneto grew up being trapped along with many of his family in a camp by World War II German soldiers. Now, I apologize for not being able to say the words that I would like to say here to give this topic the weight that I think it deserves. I think we all agree. But there are certain words and phrases that we are permitted from speaking on this platform, so I apologize for my lighter turn of phrase here and my potentially perceived levity. I promise I do take this subject very seriously. And if you have problems with the fact that we can't say certain words, I would highly recommend that you contact the platform and let them know your thoughts on that. Because yeah, I think that's important to do. Young Magneto would not only have to suffer in these camps, but he'd also have to watch as one by one his family members attempted to escape and often got so close to being truly free, only to be reined back in and pretty much all end up dead in the end. He was forced into taking care of the bodies and disposing of all who perished at the camp as well, becoming a Sonderkommando, which must have felt like psychological torture as well as being grueling work. Sonderkommandos were actually real-world special units, by the way, that existed during World War II, made up of Jewish prisoners from the camps who were forced into disposing of the victims who had been killed in the camps, threatened with their own deaths if they refused the work. In the end, Magneto did escape, but even then, he was met with tragedy. He and his love Magda would escape and start a family, finding a home in a village in the mountains. But after he was revealed to be a mutant, the people turned on him and his family, burning their home to the ground. As Magneto attempted to save his daughter, who was trapped on the upper floor of their home, soldiers attacked him, preventing him from doing so, and she died in the fire.
Starting us off in at number 10, Hit Girl.
But it's really no more painful than a punch in the chest.
Why are you getting punched in the chest?
You're gonna be fine, baby doll.
Hit Girl has always been a controversial character, especially after the live-action Kick-Ass film came out. She brings up a lot of ethical debates about the concept of child superheroes, and she is a superhero who makes use of a whole lot of violence. The character first appeared in issue 3 of the Kick-Ass comic book series as a 10-year-old assassin who works alongside her vigilante father, Big Daddy. He's trained her since she was born. The two of them are out to seek revenge for Hit Girl's mother's death caused by the mob. Or, at least, that is what Hit Girl thought they were doing. Turns out, that was a lie. Big Daddy actually kidnapped Hit Girl when she was a baby, manipulated her into hating the mob, and also Democrats, lols, and there was never a mother in the picture. Big Daddy was just a comic book nerd living out a fantasy of fighting crime. This origin story was skimmed over as far as the film adaptations were concerned. Wonder why? In at number 9, The Hulk. Did you know that Bruce Banner's problems with rage sprout from child abuse? The Hulk's origin story is one that many people are familiar with. Bruce Banner was exposed to gamma radiation while trying to save an innocent kid, turning him into the Hulk uncontrollably whenever he got mad. But there's more to his origin than that. Revealed in a 1985 issue of The Incredible Hulk, fans learned that Bruce was abused as a child by his father, who was a violent alcoholic. His father would beat him and accidentally killed Bruce's mother too. Bruce's dad was afraid of his son because of how intelligent he was, even when Bruce was just an infant. In addition to that, after receiving psychiatric treatment in 1991, he would become Professor Hulk, a way more controlled, mellowed version of himself. He even wore full-blown outfits. This did not last long though. Apparently Professor Hulk was just an aspect of Banner's personality, and he wasn't fully cured after all, returning to his angry self eventually. In at number 8, Big Bertha. Eating disorders are no laughing matter, but apparently when Big Bertha was conceived in 1998 and introduced in West Coast Avengers Volume 2 issue 46, their creator John Byrne didn't have tact in mind. Big Bertha, aka Ashley Crawford, is a character who can control her body mass and the distribution of fat on her body. When she grows large, something that she did to gain membership on the Great Lakes Avengers team, she's Big Bertha, capable of lifting incredible amounts of weight. But when she's just doing her thing in day-to-day life, she's crafted a thinner body, turning herself into an actual supermodel. In order to return to her supermodel size, she throws up all of her excess weight. So yeah, that's bulimia, and that is a pretty thing to put in a comic. Or at least in that light. In at number 7, Green Lantern, Kyle Rayner. You'd think with a hero as prominent as Green Lantern, DC would put a lot of effort into crafting an origin story for a new iteration of the character taking up the mantle, right? Wrong. Let's talk about Kyle's origin story. A very undeserved one, in which the character picked up the mantle from Hal Jordan, who'd been put through the ringer in leading up to 1994 with the Emerald Twilight story arc. Along came Kyle, a freelance graphic artist who randomly becomes a Green Lantern when he wanders out back of a heavy metal club to discover a guardian dying there. The little blue dude starts speaking to Kyle, confuses the dude bro who thinks he's hallucinating. He's also wearing a 9 Inch Nails t-shirt, might I add. And he takes the ring, not even getting an explanation for what it really does. That's that. That's how he gets his ring. And at number 6, Harley Quinn. For a very long time, Harley Quinn was characterized by her abusive relationship with the Joker. As his devout follower and girlfriend, despite the affection often being unrequited, Harley Quinn used to be Harleen Quinzel, a psychiatrist who worked at Arkham and was manipulated so badly by the Joker that she lost her mind, became obsessed with him, and eventually allowed him to toss her into a vat full of acid to fully transform her into his lover and accomplice. In recent times, she's removed herself from the Joker, going on her own adventures as more of an anti-hero, and even developed a romantic relationship with her longtime pal Poison Ivy. Up next at 5, Gin Genie. Oh, Gin Genie. We've featured this more obscure superhero on several of our lists over the years, so longtime fans of her channel should not be surprised that she made it on this one. Created in 2001 and first appearing in X-Force issue 116, Gin Genie Becca Parker is an active superhero whose powers require alcohol in order to function. So she's always drunk, which you can imagine does complicate things in battle. She had pumped a mixture of different alcohols into her bloodstream, which somehow gave her powers that enabled her to create seismic waves, capable of leveling buildings. But her power does not work unless she's borderline blackout drunk. She also died in the same issue in which she appeared, so guess she wasn't that important after all. And at number 4, Jason Todd as the Red Hood. Created in 1983, Jason Todd was the second Robin, the replacement for Dick Grayson as Batman's ward. At first, he was a strawberry blonde carbon copy of Dick, but after Crisis on Infinite Earths, he got a revamp, becoming a morally ambiguous street kid who would disobey Batman and get into all sorts of trouble. He was so disliked that when DC decided to hold a phone poll that would determine his fate, some dude actually programmed his computer to call and vote a bunch of times in order to push the odds against Jason's favor. The storyline, 1988's A Death in the Family, saw Jason getting beaten to a pulp by the Joker with a crowbar. His death would cause great psychological damage to Bruce Wayne, and many comic book creators would eventually speak out about this, saying how it was a pretty terrible thing that DC would do that to a character. The way the phone poll was held and the story was handled was quite controversial. Fast forward to 2005, Jason Todd is resurrected. For years it was believed that he was one of the only 3 characters who would never be brought back from the dead, the other 2 being Uncle Ben and Bucky Barnes. But also the Winter Soldier then, is a thing now. At least Uncle Ben's still dead. His return was controversial. Many believed it was gimmicky, while others felt that it took away from the trauma that had really inspired some interesting characterizations in Batman since. And at number 3, Ebony White. Yep, it's a racial caricature. Ebony White was the sidekick of Will Eisner's The Spirit. Often portrayed as a young boy around the age of 12 years old, his age did fluctuate a lot. Towards the beginning of the strip, he was a taxi driver and sometimes the Spirit's personal driver. While we've never been given a full origin story, Ebony's first appearance was on June 2nd of 1940, driving a taxi, noted to be the Spirit's faithful young friend. His speech patterns are also harmful racist depictions of black people. Eisner made the way that he spoke similar to the way that the character Jim from Huckleberry Finn speaks, making him appear to be uneducated and trained to obey his white master. What's worse is how Eisner would later describe the character. I quote, "At the time, humor consisted in our society of bad English and physical difference in identity." So Eisner didn't even admit that it was racist, and has even discussed how Ebony has a slave mentality. It's just bad. Just bad. And at number 2, Barbara Gordon as Oracle. Although Barbara Gordon has an origin story about how the daughter of GCPD Commissioner James Gordon became a vigilante and a member of the Bat family, the more controversial origin story of hers is when she became Oracle. Barbara has been kicking around since 1967 when she first appeared in Detective Comics issue 359, but it wasn't until 1989 that she took up the mantle of Oracle after she was paralyzed by the Joker in Batman the Killing Joke. That is where the controversy lies. The character was unnecessarily shot and crippled by the Joker, stalker and implied to be sexually assaulted as well, as a means to prove a point to Batman and screw with James Gordon. She was a mere plot device. According to Alan Moore, who penned the story and has since expressed regret concerning the treatment of Barbara in it, editor Len Wein has been quoted as saying, "Yeah, okay, cripple the when Moore had asked about approval for the story arc." Speaking of things that are incredibly offensive, that brings us to our final number on our list. In at number 1, Tyrock. Tyrock is one of DC's first black superheroes, which is definitely something to be admired, except for the fact that most of his stories, including his origin, were incredibly racially insensitive. Tyrock, whose name means Scream of the Devil in his native language apparently, was a member of the Legion of Superheroes who has a reality warping scream. The character, created by Cary Bates and Mike Grell, was a racial separatist. Instead of just having the character be a hero who just so happened to be black, they made a big deal about his race. Tyrock hails from a fictional island called Marzal, which is filled with former African slaves who hate the Legion of Superheroes. They're segregated on the island. And when the Legion visits the island, Tyrock tells them, I quote, "Racial prejudice died out long centuries ago, but perhaps the Legion is behind the times." That was in the 1940s, people. That is some f***ed up stuff coming from white writers and white editors at DC. On top of that, co-creator Mike Grell was rumored to have hated having to create Tyrock, so he deliberately made him look ridiculous. I quote, "I gave him a silly costume. It was somewhere between Elvis's Las Vegas costume and something you would imagine a pimp on the street corner wearing."
Number 10, Deadman. Deadman first appeared in Strange Adventures number 205 in 1967, and while he is rarely, if ever, talked about in the same circles as most of the other origin stories on this list, I find his origin relatively unique and compelling. Boston Brand was a daring circus trapeze artist known for his gruff exterior that hid a heart of gold. This gruff exterior caused him to have a lot of people who disliked him. He was known for performing death-defying acts while dressed in a corpse-like mask, until one day, during his show, he was shot and killed by persons unknown. Due to him being well liked by the Hindu goddess Ramakrishna, Brand was allowed to stay on Earth as a ghost so that he could help protect the innocents and track down his murderer and bring them to justice. He is invisible to pretty much everyone, but he has the power to enter the living and possess and control their bodies, which really sets his story apart from other heroes. His story is interesting because it tackles mortality as well as regret, and it is a catalyst for a lot of growth for Boston, despite the fact that he is a dead man. Number 9, Captain America. Captain America first came on the scene in late 1940 in Captain America Comics number 1, featuring the hero punching out the leader of the German army almost a year before America entered World War II. His origin is beautiful in its simplicity. A frail man who has been deemed unfit for service in the US military desperately wants to serve his country, and agrees to undergo an experimental procedure that will grant him incredible abilities. Before the formula can be used to create more super soldiers, a spy destroys the formula and kills the professor who created it, leaving Steve Rogers as the only super soldier. He becomes Captain America, but his secret identity is soon discovered by a young boy serving as the regiment's mascot named Bucky Barnes, and Steve decides that the most reasonable way to deal with this is to bring the small child with him into an active war zone as his sidekick. The nuances of his origin have been explored more in the years since, but it is otherwise unchanged and was very faithfully adapted in the MCU film adaptation. Not so much in the weird 70s made-for-TV movie though. Interestingly, the first time we meet Steve in the comics is when he's undergoing the procedure, so we don't really get to know anything about his character before he is Captain America. Number 8, Wonder Woman. In her initial appearance in 1942's All-Star Comics number 8, Wonder Woman's origin was that she was the daughter of Hippolyta, the queen of the Amazons. Hippolyta desperately wanted a child and prayed to the gods to bring life to a clay statue of a little girl that she had made. You know, like Pinocchio. Aphrodite granted her wish, and the clay became a real girl. She was raised as an Amazon, quickly learning and excelling in their ways. The Amazons lived in secret on Paradise Island until a World War II pilot named Steve Trevor crash landed. Diana saved his life and decided she wanted to come back to the world of man so that she could fight the Axis powers, as well as be with Steve, who she thought was a certified hottie. The Amazons held a competition to determine who would go, and Diana won, being allowed to go to the modern world and being given her iconic costume, tiara, and lasso of truth, and she became Wonder Woman. Her origin story has been tweaked several times over the years, with the time period changing and her being sent as an emissary from her island, but for the most part, it has stayed pretty much the same. Number 7. Captain Marvel. First appearing in 1940's Whiz Comics number 2, Billy Batson was an orphan living on the mean streets. One day, a strange man in a trench coat approached him and told the young boy to follow him into an abandoned subway station. He did, and the man revealed himself to be a wizard, and took Billy to the Rock of Eternity. The wizard Shazam told Billy that he had been chosen to be the wizard's champion and gave him the power to transform into a manly superhero who had the wisdom of Solomon, the strength of Hercules, the stamina of Atlas, the power of Zeus, the courage of Atlas, and the speed of Mercury. He could transform whenever he used the magic word Shazam. So, remember kids, if a strange man ever approaches you and asks you to follow him into an abandoned building, go with him. He is probably a wizard who wants to give you powers. Billy's origin has had a few alterations over the years, but the broad strokes are pretty much unchanged. What has changed over the years is his name. After Fawcett Comics was sued by the company that would become DC for alleged copyright infringement, they claimed Captain Marvel was a ripoff of Superman. Captain Marvel was cancelled until DC bought the character and decided to bring him back. By that time, Marvel Comics had their own Captain Marvel, and though DC was allowed to keep calling the character Captain Marvel, the book had to be renamed Shazam. Eventually, it was decided it was simpler if they simply called Billy Shazam, though his name will apparently soon be changed to simply the Captain. Billy's origin is great as it is the ultimate child's wish fulfillment power fantasy. While children in comics at the time were relegated to sidekick roles, Billy was able to be the strong hero anytime he wanted with just the utterance of a magic word. His origin does a great job of tapping into a really primal desire, and it's one of my favorites. Number 6. Iron Man. Tony Stark was a wealthy weapons designer who was kidnapped by radicals. In the attack, shrapnel was lodged in his chest that would result in him dying within a week. His captors lied and told him that if he designed weapons for them, they would give him a life-saving surgery. Tony knew they were lying, but played for time, creating a metal chest plate that acted like a pacemaker, keeping him alive. Him and his fellow captive, Yinsen, secretly created a robot mech suit so that they could escape, but as it was charging up, their captors came to check on them. Yinsen sacrificed himself to allow Tony to survive, and Tony used his first Iron Man suit to take out the cell and escaped back to America. He soon decided to become a superhero, but kept his identity secret for much of his history by claiming that Iron Man was actually his bodyguard. It's an interesting origin that has aged really well, all things considered, with it having a lot of thematic weight, tackling the idea of the consequences of the military-industrial complex, and Tony being one of Marvel's most flawed heroes. Number 5. Daredevil. Matt Murdock was the son of a boxer named Battling Jack Murdock. Jack wanted his son to have a better life than him, and forbid him from ever fighting, making him study as much as possible instead. His unwillingness to fight earned him the ironic nickname Daredevil from his bullies. One day, Matt saw a blind man crossing the street and about to be hit by a truck. Matt heroically pushed him out of the way, but was struck himself. The truck was carrying a radioactive isotope, which got in Matt's eyes, blinding him, but granting him heightened senses that allowed him to do incredible feats. He trained to be an incredible fighter and acrobat in secret, and grew up to be a lawyer. His father was paid to throw a boxing match, but decided to win the match and was killed by a villain called the Fixer. Matt took on the Daredevil persona to avenge his father's death and defend the people of Hell's Kitchen. In the 80s, Frank Miller reworked Matt's origin a bit, introducing elements like a blind mentor named Stick, but overall, this relatively unique origin stuck, giving everyone one of Marvel's coolest heroes, while also providing representation for disabled people. Number 4. The Hulk. While testing his gamma bomb for the US military, Professor Bruce Banner realized that a teenager had wandered onto the test site, so he got him to safety but was caught in the blast himself. This changed him so that whenever he became angry, he would transform into the Hulk, a giant green, or gray, rage monster. The monster is frequently misunderstood and chased by the military, resulting in destructive rampages from the creature, but he has also tackled his fair share of supervillains, saving the world several times. The Hulk has changed a lot over the years, going from gray to green in his first few appearances due to printer issues, being transformed by the setting sun in his original stories, then using a gamma ray machine to control the transformations, and eventually having them be triggered by emotional stimuli. But the cause of Bruce's powers has remained consistent in the many years of the comics, with its atomic Frankenstein Frankenstein meets Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde themes, providing Marvel with one of its most unique and interesting characters. Number 3, Spider-Man. We're in the top 3, but really, any of these next ones could be number 1 depending on your personal preference, due to each of them being absolutely iconic. When a teenager named Peter Parker was bitten by a radioactive spider, he was granted spider powers, which he decided to use for personal gain, spending time as a wrestler and a television personality. One night, a thief ran past Spidey, and Spider-Man decided not to stop him, thinking it wasn't his problem. In a strange coincidence, the robber broke into Peter's home, resulting in the death of Peter's Uncle Ben. Spider-Man went after the crook, and upon recognizing him, was racked with guilt that his inaction resulted in an innocent life being lost. He vowed to be a hero and realized that with great power, there must also come great responsibility. All of this is present in his first appearance in Amazing Fantasy number 15 from 1962, and has remained virtually unchanged due to how strong it is. The idea of having the catalyst of the hero's heroics be his fault adds a layer of guilt to the proceedings that helps define Spidey as a character, and it really doesn't get much better than this. Number 2, Batman. When Bruce Wayne was a child, he and his parents were walking home one night when they were confronted by a robber. The robber, later named Joe Chill, shot Bruce's parents, leaving them dead on the pavement in front of the traumatized young boy. He made a vow to dedicate his life to fighting crime in Gotham City and spent his formative years training his mind and body to be the ultimate crime fighter. When he was grown, he was almost ready, but needed some way to strike fear into the hearts of criminals, as he knew that they were a superstitious and cowardly lot. At that moment, a bat flew through his window, and he was inspired to become Batman. Over the years, this origin has been expanded upon, and his time training has been more fleshed out, but that's his origin, and it's perfect. It's dark and gothic and perfectly suits the character. It is so ingrained in our public consciousness at this point that we're kind of sick of seeing it, or even hearing about it whenever the character brings it up in media. At this point, you could just have Batman show up and never mention why he does it, and everyone would still know, and that's the mark of a strong origin. Number 1, Superman. When the planet Krypton was about to be destroyed, one child was placed in a rocket and sent to Earth so that he might survive. Once on Earth, this child was raised by a kindly couple who taught him right from wrong. When he grew up, he decided to use his powers for good and be a superhero. Disguised as mild-mannered reporter Clark Kent, whenever trouble strikes, he becomes Superman. This origin was present in its broad strokes with the character's first appearance in 1938's Action Comics number 1, which features the doomed planet and sent to Earth in a rocket elements. A year later, in Superman number 1, the story was expanded upon, introducing the Kents who took him in. And in the years since, the origin has been reinterpreted and expanded upon, but all of the initial elements are still present. Although, in her first appearance, Clark's mom is named Mary, which is funny because in the years since, they've made a pretty big deal about her name being Martha. I think this origin is one of my favorites due to how classic it is, but also the fact that it is essentially just the Old Testament story of Moses, showing how storytelling and myth has evolved over the years while still having similar themes show up over and over again.
Number 10, Nightcrawler. Nightcrawler. Oh boy. I still think to this day one of the weirdest facts about him is that he's the son of Mystique and Azazel, a demon who claims to be the devil. Azazel is also weird in the sense that he comes with his own lore as part of a race of demonic mutants known as the Neophim, who were opposed to a race of angelic-looking mutants known as the Chearophim, that apparently Angel is also one of. Nightcrawler would be abandoned shortly after he was born by his mother, who was fleeing an angry mob. He'd be taken in by a family tied to magic, the Zardoses, and later would also end up dating his foster sister, Jermaine Zardos, who we'd later come to know as Amanda Sefton, which I mean, granted she was kind of undercover at the time, but still, I feel like if you know your foster sister, you know who your foster sister is. Don't think her being like, my name's Amanda, would change it for me. I'd be like, wait, but you look exactly like my foster sister. And friends, before we move on to our next spot on this list, if you love what we do here at Top 10 Nerd and you love when we talk about weird stuff, we have a weirdest playlist for you to check out, so go check that out after. Number 9, Booster Gold. Booster Gold is a time-traveling hero from the future, and from the look of him, you might not even guess this, considering that for a hero who should hail from a more advanced timeline, he often isn't known for being one of the best or the brightest. twist. Booster Gold was actually Michael Carter, who was born during the 25th century in Gotham. His dad left his family when he was young to pursue his obsession with gambling, and leaving his family deep in debt. In order to help his sick mother, Michael would eventually also follow in his father's footsteps to earn the money he needed to help her get well again. His mother would end up being saved, but following the revelation of how Michael had gotten that money through gambling, was also shamed by her son's actions. Michael decided to make things right and set out on a path to make something of himself, and while working as a security guard at a museum, was inspired by the heroes on display there, stealing tech from the museum to travel to the past and become a hero himself, also using his knowledge of the past that he had as someone who came from the future. So he's actually a security guard from the future with basic museum tech, using it to parade around as a hero, which is pretty funny, especially when you consider Skeets, his little droid that flies around and helps him out, actually is just like basically security tech from the museum. It's like one of those things that's supposed to walk you around the museum and be like, this exhibit is this, here is the history. Number 8, Jean Grey. Jean Grey is not a character you likely think of when you think of unbelievable origins. However, there are some things that I feel like we gotta talk about. Probably you wouldn't think of that because her origin is often explained away by her status as a mutant, but trust me, it gets kind of weird. Jean was only a young girl when her powers first manifested, with her mind becoming bonded to the mind of a young schoolmate just as said schoolmate was hit by a car and basically lay dying. This left Jean pretty much traumatized, and her parents ended up reaching out to Professor Charles Xavier eventually for help. Xavier ultimately placed a mental block in Jean's mind in order to protect her against her insanely powerful telepathic abilities. Years later, Jean would join his school for gifted youngsters, and Charles would also creepily fantasize about what a potential romantic relationship would be like with Jean. Pretty weird, considering everything else we now know. Although he knew this would of course never be possible. Not because he was, years her senior as well as her teacher and her mentor, but because he was confined to a wheelchair. Those are his thoughts, not mine. Oh, Charles. Number 7, Hitman. Definitely a strange one, and thank you to Pablo in the comments for the suggestion, who suggested it on my part 1. Well, I'm not really sure if it was intended as a suggestion, but that's definitely how I took it, so here we go. Hitman is Tommy Monahan, the son of a lady of the night who was based in Gotham. His mom, named Catherine Monahan, took to naming her children after the men who used her services and who were the biological fathers of said children, in an attempt to shame them. However, Tommy's father, Tom Dawson, was not a fan of this and actually warned Catherine, threatening her life, that she should not do that. Stubborn, she did so anyways with him, which resulted in her life and the life of her offspring, save Tommy, being lost. Tommy would grow up in a Catholic orphanage and would go on to serve in the military before becoming a hitman. Despite the fact that he was an assassin in the DC universe, Tommy was still considered to be a hero because he avoided killing people who he deemed to be good. During one of his jobs, he ended up in a confrontation with a bloodline parasite, a dragon-like parasitic alien, who attempted to kill him by drinking his spinal fluid, because that's what those guys do. The parasite's attempt failed, and afterwards Tommy observed that he now had low-level telepathic powers. This is a true story from a comic. I mean, it's not a true story, but in the comics world, it's a true story. That happened. Number 6, the Fantastic Four. While the Fantastic Four have become an iconic superhero team as Marvel's first family, when you think about it, their origin story is, pretty strange. Reed Richards was the mastermind behind their transformation, which actually happened not by his own design, but kind of by accident. After facing the threat of a loss of funding for his Starship project, Reed decided to prove the merits of said project by taking his Starship, the Marvel 1, on a test flight, which would thereby prove its worth should the flight be successful, which of course Reed was like, it'll be successful, it'll be great, we're not gonna worry about the fact that I shouldn't even legally probably be doing this. While his friend Ben Grimm was always set to pilot this flight, Reed also agreed to bring along his girlfriend Susan Storm and her younger brother Johnny, who at that time really had no space or flight qualifications to speak of that I know of, and thanks to a storm of cosmic rays, the four were forever changed by the flight, as we know. It's weird that the four of them were the ones that ended up on it. Especially Sue being like, hey, can I bring Johnny, my brother? It's like, sure, why not? We got 4 seats, let's do it. Number 5, Green Lantern. For this origin tale, we're going all the way back to the first Green Lantern, Alan Scott, who also technically isn't really the same kind of Green Lantern as those who would come after him. Instead of being given his powers by the Lantern Corps and the Guardians of the Universe, Scott was basically given his powers and saved by the Green Lantern of Life, later established as an entity held prisoner by the Guardians known as Starheart. In the original story in All American Comics issue number 16, the green light first crash landed to Earth and used its flame in China to bring death, then in America, new life, curing a man who was once insane, and finally saving Alan Scott and granting him the gift of power. Which I also feel like that's kind of weird, because it's like, first there was death, then there was life, now there's power. But I'm like, but you also saved Alan Scott's life, so technically it was like death, life, power. It's like 2 gifts, really. Number 4, Dazzler. One of my all-time favorite heroes in the comics, Alison Blair, definitely has a strange origin. She is a mutant, which relative to comics is not actually that strange, of course, because there are many mutants. In Marvel Comics, there are many other ones at this point that exist, and they have actually become probably some of the most popular groups around in terms of the comic publisher. However, even among mutants, Alison's story is kind of odd. After learning her mutant powers, she was not compelled or inspired like so many others out there to become a hero. Instead, she wanted to use her powers to entertain others and give herself kind of a career boost. Alison's powers often get downplayed, but they are actually insanely powerful. She can transmute sound into light. She can use this light to do a bunch of different things, including shooting powerful lasers, creating massive light explosions, and completely obliterating her enemies. Like, literally, she's turned people into, nothing, because they were just like vaporized, basically. But that's never really been what Daz is actually about. Instead, she usually just wants to sing and perform while on tour with her band, while being accepted for who she is by the world, as well as her family and her friends. Built into her origins was also the mystery of what happened to her mother and a dramatic relationship with her father, who kicked her out after she didn't follow in his footsteps and become a lawyer. And I love that these are like major things in her series, as opposed to it being about, like constantly fighting bad guys. That happens too, but it's always like, oh boy, how'd I get myself in this situation? Number 3, Martian Manhunter. John Johns definitely has a strange origin story that sounds so fantastic to imagine, especially when you consider some of the weird coincidences involved in it. He was born as a twin, highly unlikely in Martian culture. His twin, however, was considered a mutant, born without any telepathic abilities. As such, his brother, Ma-Alefa'ak, grew up to hate his people and created a virus to destroy them that infected Martians through their telepathy. On Mars, John was a police officer, and in an attempt to protect his family against this virus, he tried to convince them not to use their telepathic gifts, which they did try to do, but unfortunately that didn't work. This failed, and he lost both his wife. This failed, and he lost both his daughter and his wife, who went up in flames as the virus preyed on the Martians' natural fear of flames, intensifying it to the point that those infected would simply just like burst into flames. Shortly after this, he was pulled to Earth via an experiment of Dr. Saul Erdel, who created a device in an attempt to communicate with aliens, aiming this device at Mars. The device reached across space and time and captured John, who was brought to Earth and made to forget this past trauma through Erdel. The two had basically developed a mental link, and Erdel used this to craft a different backstory for John, which was implanted in the Martian's mind. And he did this kind of as a kindness to like help him get over everything that had happened to him. On Earth, John would disguise himself as a human police detective, going by the name John Jones. Number 2, Magic. Magic definitely has a pretty weird one when it comes to her origin, and I saw all y'all in the comments on part 1 being like, but where's Magic? Magic should be on here. You're right, Magic is pretty cool, and that's why she's so high up on this part. She is the younger sister of Colossus and Mikhail Rasputin. Initially, she was kidnapped and held hostage in exchange for the X-Men fighting to free Arcade from Dr. Doom's clutches. Once safe, she ended up moving to the US to live with her brother in the X-Men. However, shortly after this move, young Illyana was once again kidnapped, this time by the powerful demon lord Belasco, who sensed great power in her and took her to Limbo. Here she would be raised to become Belasco's possible heir and also his tool, with him exerting control over her. Eventually, she would return home and would also conquer Limbo, usurping Belasco to become the Dimension's ruler, forever changed from her terrifying time being both tormented and kinda trained in the Hell Dimension. Interesting. Number 1, The Flash. What gave the Flash, Barry Allen, his powers? It turns out he did. Well, initially in the comics, Barry is seen as getting his powers from being doused in chemicals and struck by lightning in his lab following the events of Crisis on Infinite Earths. It was retconned that the lightning that actually struck Barry was in fact kind of because of Barry, who was kind of transformed into lightning following his death in Crisis. In Secret Origins issue number 2 from the 80s, we learned that Barry went back in time and kind of gave his past self a choice between becoming a hero and having a shorter life, or possibly having a longer, more normal life. Barry, of course, chose lightning, and here we are. So in a way, Barry actually gave himself his powers because of the events of Crisis on Infinite Earths, which is mind-blowing when you think about it. Number 10, Spider-Woman. I love Jessica Drew, but her origin story really is just straight up weird. I even was explaining it to someone who is not familiar with her as Spider-Woman the other day, and even just hearing myself explain, it sounded weird to me too. I was like, just go with me here, it's a strange story. Jessica Drew was very young when she got sick, possibly because her father had actually wanted to experiment on her. That's, I believe, I don't know if we've ever pinpointed that, but seems likely, and had chosen to expose his family to a radioactive area. Her dad ended up curing Jessica of her illness by giving her a serum based off of spiders and putting her into stasis basically for years so she could heal. Now, by the time that she was healed and emerged from the tube she was held in, she was a young adult, although admittedly she was, as I said, healed, and she now had superpowers. But what she didn't have at the time, of course, was life experience, because she had pretty much spent all of her time in a tube. She had spent most of her life thus far in a tube in a suspended state, so it's easy to see how initially she got used as a pawn of Hydra's. There is also a version of her origin where Jessica was actually a woman who started out as a spider who simply evolved into a human form, which is even more bonkers of a story. Fortunately, this was later retconned to be a false memory implanted in Jess's mind, so that's how we make sense of that. Although it is still a weird detail that someone would be like, yeah, I'm just gonna mess with her and make her think she evolved from a spider. Why not? And friends, before we move on to our next spot on this list, if you love what we do here at Top 10 Nerd and you love when I talk about weird comic book stuff, I love talking about weird comic book stuff, check out our Top 10 Weirdest playlist. We all talk about weird stuff over there. It's a lovely playlist. Number 9, Captain Marvel. Carol Danvers' origin started out weird and only got weirder with time, it seems. This one is weird to me especially because I feel like it was kind of given a retcon that it didn't really need, but it got it anyways. But at the same time, I also acknowledge that the retcon may have simply been added to make Carol's origins make more sense or appear more streamlined. Carol Danvers was a security guard who ended up acting as an ally for and falling in love with the original Mar-Vell. At one point, her life was endangered by Mar-Vell's vengeful rival Yon-Rogg when the device known as the Psyche Magnetron exploded. In that moment, Carol wished that she was more like Mar-Vell, and so she became as such, because that's what happens when you get caught in a Psyche Magnetron explosion. She ended up manifesting similar powers and adopting the superhero moniker Miss Marvel. Years later, Carol has taken up the mantle of her former mentor, Captain Marvel, which is why we know her as such now, and has also learned that apparently this whole time, on her mother's side, she was actually half Kree, which is the same alien race that Mar-Vell belonged to, which also, I guess, in part accounts for her abilities manifesting. Though I think it's kind of fine that like kind of a wishing machine just allowed her to have those abilities. I think that makes sense too, but half Kree, let's do it. Number 8, Bouncing Boy. Bouncing Boy is Chuck Tane, and not only is he ridiculous in terms of his own abilities and appearance, but so is his origin story. He's known for being a member of the futuristic superhero team, the Legion of Superheroes, or he's known for eventually being a member of that team. This team hails from the 31st century, where they're teen heroes who are known not just for protecting the Earth, but also any other worlds that belong to the group known as the United Planets. Bouncing Boy himself initially was not considered good enough in the original continuity to join the Legion, trying out and failing to be accepted twice prior to finally securing his place on that team. Probably because of how odd his powers are, honestly. One day during a sports match, he made the mistake of drinking super plastic fluid by accident, which is what gave him the ability to basically inflate himself and turn himself into a human bouncing rubber ball. Why we call him Bouncing Boy. Number 7, Hellboy. Some might not think Hellboy's origins are that weird, but I would challenge that line of thinking. I think Hellboy's origins origins only seem normal because we know him so well at this point. But it's pretty weird that an organization who is kind of known for hunting monsters would retrieve him after he was summoned by a dark World War II German cult and apparently is destined to bring about a massive apocalyptic event, and yet would still choose to raise and adopt him and just raise him up among their ranks. It just seems like an odd choice, I think, when we consider his origins. I love it for him, but it's weird. Number 6. Vampirella. Vampirella has to have one of the weirdest origin stories ever. Possibly one of the reasons that I love her so much. Especially when you consider how many times it has straight up changed on her. She's had a lot of retcons in her origins. I think my favorite one though, my favorite version of her origin though, is still kind of the weirdest by most people's standards. Her first origin. Although to me, this one actually feels a lot simpler than the rest of what we were given for Vampy later on with Lilith and Hell and all that stuff. I'm not talking about that aspect of her origin, but instead I'm talking about Draculon, the original Draculon, which initially was a whole other planet in outer space where a bunch of other alien vampires like Vampirella lived. Instead of having water on their planet, blood flowed through and around it. But after a catastrophic event where all the blood basically kind of like dried up, they had like a major drought, Vampy left her homeworld for Earth. She even makes her way to Earth in a very interesting fashion, basically kind of like hijacking the spaceship of some astronauts who crash landed on Draculon after discovering that the life force energy powering them, their blood, is actually drinkable to her and can act as a food source. Very strangely convenient, and I love it. Number 5. Silk. Silk just had a really weird life in general, never mind her origin story, although that admittedly is also pretty weird, which is why she's on my list. Sydney Moon was one of those folks who was created as a character later in terms of comic history, but who was woven into the fabric of the original history as though she was kinda always there. She went to the same school as Peter and happened to be bitten by the same radioactive spider. However, she learned much earlier on about spider totems and as a result was hidden away in a bunker for years, growing up without much contact with the outside world. She also has a whole thing tied to Peter when it comes to her origins in terms of her feeling real frisky around him because they were bitten by the same spider. But fortunately, that's in the past now. But that was a thing, and it was weird. Number 4. Dog Welder 2. Dog Welder is just straight up weird, and I feel like weird is a timid way of putting that. I don't know if we'd actually even call him a hero, a straight up superhero, based on the fact that what he does sounds kind of villainous actually, but he is supposedly a part of a superhero team, albeit a kind of terrible superhero team, but still I feel like we kind of need to count him, even though I myself am very skeptical about categorizing him as a hero, but he is categorized as such in the comics, so here we go. The original Dog Welder was downright dastardly, but Dog Welder 2, his successor, is at least not really fully in control of what he does and definitely has, one of the weirdest origin stories ever as a result, so at least he's a little bit better but also weirder. He ended up stumbling upon the original Dog Welder's equipment and became possessed by it, compelled to weld dogs to people. Despite having what seemed to be a happy life with his family, Dog Welder 2 could not stop himself, could not resist the urge from welding his kids to the dog. As a result, his wife divorced him and later remarried. That's what you do. Also, what a weird story. Also the fact that he's still holding out hope, like maybe one day I'll be able to talk to them again. I don't think you come back from that, my friend. I think you're done. Number 3. Howard the Duck. Howard the Duck hails from a planet known as Duck World, where apparently ducks are not only intelligent, but also, coincidentally, happen to speak English, as so many on Earth do. What a coincidence. As weird as that sounds though, what's even weirder is the way Howard got to Earth, which is kinda debated in the comics with a few different stories telling this tale. Although I personally like the version where it's mentioned that Florida is basically located at the center of the nexus of all realities of Earth 616, which I think is pretty wild and pretty funny and kind of great. I also love that in that version of the story, that's kind of where like Howard first appeared, was in the Everglades in Florida. It's just funny because he obviously is also supposed to be a parody on Donald Duck, so yes. Number 2. Scarlet Witch. Wanda Maximoff has one of the most simple and yet at the same time convoluted origins in all of comics. Initially, she was simply a young woman who was a mutant and was saved by Magneto alongside her brother Pietro, aka Quicksilver. Feeling indebted to Magneto for saving their lives from an angry mob, they pledged themselves to Magneto's cause, serving him as members of his Brotherhood of Mutants, or Brotherhood of Evil Mutants if you prefer. However, later on, we learned that Magneto was also their dad, that, and that the children were simply adopted by the Maximovs. It's kind of have like two groups of parents. Wanda's magic would go from mutant originating hex powers to being tied to Chthon to chaos magic to simply just magic that was passed down from her mother, who was also known for being a powerful witch. And Magneto would go from being unaware father to birth father to emotionally complicated dad to Magneto, you are not the father. And more recently was like more of an adopted father to Wanda and Pietro himself before he kick the bucket, although he'll probably be back at some point soon if he's not already at the time of this recording. Wanda would go from being mutant outcast to mutant villain to mutant pretender, having been revealed as someone who was simply made to look like a mutant after being experimented on very early in life by the High Evolutionary for some reason, and finally back to being cool with mutants again after she was able to help them access sort of lost consciousness backups for mutants long thought lost and therefore unresurrectable. Basically, Scarlet Witch is just weird. That's the only way it goes. Doesn't matter what part of the origin story we're at, it's crazy. Number 1. Jessica Jones. Jessica Jones is another one of those characters who is retroactively given close ties to other heroes, with her character having been created later on in the early 2000s. But if you thought Silk was wild, Jessica goes pretty crazy into that. She had a crush on Human Torch, went to the same school and was in the same grade as Peter Parker, and her dad worked for Tony Stark. What? She would end up being exposed to radioactive chemicals in a tragic car crash that the rest of her family perished in. During her first flight, where she lost control of her powers, Thor saved her. Thor. Shortly after this, Jessica would take up the superhero name of Jewel and would end up almost immediately afterward being controlled by the Purple Man and forced to do what he bid her. All in all, her origin is pretty messed up and also just pretty wild.
Kicking off the list at number 10 is the Ultimate Red Skull. In the Ultimate Universe, Steve Rogers and his girlfriend at the time, Gail Richards, shared a sweet night of romance together way back in 1945, just before he went and got himself popsicled. 9 months later, out popped a sweet baby that the government decided needed to be kept a secret. They took the boy into foster care on a military base, training him to become a super soldier to take the place of his missing and frozen father. He soon became stronger and even more tactically skillful than Captain America was, but even though he seemed to be the perfect soldier, Rogers' son had in reality been carefully planning his escape. Now fast forward to 1963, when he was finally at the age of 17, and the son went off the handle, removing all the doctors and soldiers at his facility of their lives. If you didn't gather that this guy was absolutely insane, he also used a kitchen knife to remove the skin from his own head, officially and literally becoming the Red Skull. In rebellion against the system that created him, he becomes a mentally unstable assassin and tries to eventually steal Reed Richards' plans for the Cosmic Cube in order to use it to change history so he could grow up with his father. It was absolutely psychotic up until that very last point. Number 9. Dr. Doom. Victor Von Doom was the child of Romani people living in Latveria. His mother was a sorceress, and after her passing at the hands of Mephisto, resulting in her soul being held hostage by the Hell Lord, and the later passing of his father, Victor began to study her books, teaching himself the dark arts, while also developing a keen scientific mind which made him a legendary scientist and inventor at a very young age. This led to him being tracked down by the US military and offered further education in the United States. It was here that he met Reed Richards, and the two became intellectual rivals. Doom wanted nothing more than to save his mother from the hold of Mephisto, so he became obsessed with developing a machine that could project the astral form of a being into other dimensions, seeing it as a way to free his mother's soul from Mephisto. One day, Reed Richards went into Doom's dorm without permission and saw that he was working on the device, but Reed saw it as an unstable dimensional portal to an unknown realm and pointed out all the ways that it wouldn't work. Doom refused to listen since he was peed off at Reed for going into his dorm and looking at his stuff, but also because Doom's plans were based on an understanding of the supernatural that Reed just didn't appreciate. Reed, however, was right, and the machine ended up blowing up in Doom's face, literally, causing him to be disfigured. Despite that initial failure, through magic and other means, once a year, every single year, Doom would challenge Mephisto for the fate of his mother's soul, and he almost always loses. Number 8. Ultimate Mr. Sinister. Again, in the Ultimate Universe, Mr. Sinister is reimagined as a former bioengineer who specialized in urban stealth and mind-altering substances to create a super soldier who could evade any form of detection and hypnotically persuade others. Unfortunately, Unfortunately, his superiors refused to allow Nathaniel Essex to test his research on human subjects, so he experimented on himself and acquired superhuman powers. But he also became a schizophrenic street thug with a white tank top, weird tattoos, and a proclivity for gunning down mutants to please his Lord Apocalypse. But his Lord Apocalypse isn't even real and is just a hallucination / an effigy Sinister has constructed out of trash. This Lord Apocalypse inside of Sinister's head would preach about ushering in a, quote, final age of mutant dominance or the end of the world. But to do so, Sinister apparently had to remove 10 innocent mutants from existence. 4 issues of the X-Men chasing down a delusional mutant murderer were some of the best from the Ultimate X-Men's extended run. Number 7. Earth 17 Overman. On Earth 17, that appeared very briefly in Animal Man issue number 23, superheroes are a product of government experiments. The Superman of this universe is called Overman, and he was the first hero with all the other heroes being spawns of his own DNA. That seems pretty normal for a comic book. It feels very The Boys. But just like The Boys, things get really weird. Overman ends up catching some kind of promiscuously transmitted disease from another person, which somehow drives him completely insane. Overman destroys Earth 17's Justice League and reduces the entire world to rubble. And that was all before he gets his filthy paws on an incredibly powerful doomsday device that he intends to use to wipe Earth 17 out completely. But before he does that, he is temporarily transported to the main DC universe. The Crisis on Infinite Earths destroyed this reality, which seems like an effort by DC to destroy such a naughty Superman story. They even created different, less weird, but still evil iterations of Overman, like an Overman who became allied with the Axis powers in World War II. But the internet, we never forget that kind of thing, you weirdos. Number 6. Dexstar. It's true, the Red Lantern of Sector 2814, Dexstar, is an irrationally rage-filled kitten cat, and he's scary. But it's all because he really loved his owner, which is kinda sweet. Dexstar's origin shows the cat Dexter with his owner when she is attacked by robbers who broke into her home. While Dexter tried his best to scratch the attackers, they ended up bringing a close to the life of Dexter's owner. When the police showed up on the scene though, Dexter was kicked out into the streets so he wouldn't contaminate the scene. So this cat lost his owner and his home. That's bad enough, but then 2 sickos from the streets found Dexter when he was trying to sleep, put him in a sack, and threw him into a river. This unbelievable and unfortunate sequence of events filled this poor little kitty with enough pure, unbridled rage that it caught the attention of Atrocitus, who called out to him and made Dexter a Red Lantern. With this newfound power of the Red Lantern ring, the Rage Kitty exacted sweet revenge on the sickos who sacked him and flew to say goodbye to his owner one last time, saying, in his little cat language, "I find who hurt you, I kill, I good kitty." Number 5. The Joker. There are many variations of the Joker's origin story, with no one version being officially accepted. And that's because he either doesn't remember the real one, doesn't want to tell anyone, or is just so insane that he makes up a new one every single time. It's part of what makes the Joker so compelling. The most popular of his origin stories, though, sees him as a civilian named Jack. Jack leaves behind a career as a chemical engineer to go into stand-up comedy. When he fails miserably, he turns to a gang of criminals in order to support his pregnant wife. The criminals name him Red Hood and set up a robbery at a chemical plant, threatening and or taking the life of his family in order to force Jack into working with them. At the plant, the gang are taken down by security, and in the terror of seeing Batman as he fled away, Red Hood / Jack falls into a vat of chemicals. When he emerged being drastically physically altered, he also ends up having a complete and very drastic psychotic breakdown and focuses obsessively on Batman for the rest of his life. Number 4. Monsieur Malat and the Brain. When I tell you that a super intelligent French militant gorilla named Monsieur Malat and a disembodied brain belonging to a French scientific genius and master criminal are not only the primary leaders of the Brotherhood of Evil, but are also in a relationship together, then you know this is gonna be wild. So, Monsieur Malat and the Brain, who were villains to both the Doom Patrol and the Teen Titans first appeared in Doom Patrol number 86 in 1964. Brain was once a scientist who experimented on the gorilla who would become Mala, increasing Mala's intelligence. Unfortunately, an accident injured Ernst, the scientist, and Mala had to remove Ernst's brain and place it in a technological holding device to keep him alive and able to communicate. And thus, the villainous duo were born. The two are almost always together, with Mala usually carrying around the brain. Their story and even the characters themselves are odd to say the least, but so are the Doom Patrol, so it all just kind of makes sense in the end, doesn't it? Number 3. Bane. Bane was born inside the feared Pina Duro prison on Santa Prisca, an island in the Caribbean Sea, after his father, Edmund Dorrance, escaped and had the corrupt government transfer his life sentence to his unborn child. That alone is just so messed up. This child was forced to serve his father's prison sentence, is named Bane by a prison warden after he took the first of many lives while still growing up. Bane spends his time in prison building himself into the perfect specimen of physical and mental ability, teaching himself strategy, philosophy, languages, and mathematics while also turning his body into the example of peak fitness and strength. Bane becomes the, quote, king of the prison and is its most feared inmate. Being such an incredible specimen of a human being, Bane is selected for use in a super soldier experimental program, being injected with a lethal substance called venom. But unlike any other before him, Bane not only survives, but he finds the venom further enhances his already outstanding physical abilities, but with the caveat that it must be taken every 12 hours. To help that, a system of tubes is installed on Bane to pump venom directly into his system. It's not too long after that Bane sets his sights on dominating Gotham City and its bat-themed protector. In at number 2, it's Cheetah. Cheetah was initially a famous archaeologist named Dr. Barbara Ann Minerva. She was a bit, I don't know what's the word, quirky? With an obsessive love of artifacts and not much of a care for other human beings. But still, she wasn't exactly evil, not at first. Minerva stumbled upon an ancient tribe in Africa that was protected by a female guardian with the powers of a cheetah. Super cool. So cool that when she is told the legend of this female hero by a witch doctor, she believes she can become the next cheetah. To do this, Minerva has to become the bride of a plant god by the name of Kartaga. I'm sorry if I mispronounced that. She fulfills all of the requirements to become his bride, ingesting a mixture of human blood, berries, and his leaves, but while things seem to be going smoothly, she was not told the key requirement, that she needs to be a virgin. Since Minerva is not a virgin, she is instead cursed to suffer severe pain when she's in human form and have an insatiable bloodlust whenever she turns into Cheetah. And finally, in at number 1, it's Armless Tiger Man. If any of you know me, then you know Gustav Hertz was going to make this list. Gustav worked in a mechanical laboratory in Munich, Germany during the 1940s, but unfortunately for Hertz, one day his arms got caught in a machine and had to be amputated. While this is a horrible thing to happen to anyone, Gustav did survive the experience, and he was later given reading material on how to operate day to day without arms, instead using his mouth and feet to complete daily tasks. Turns out that he was really good at this. Hertz developed ridiculous skill in using his teeth and feet. He even took things a couple steps further. He sharpened his teeth into fangs that he could use as weapons and tools, and he even developed above average levels of strength and dexterity in his jaw, legs, and toes, allowing him to bend steel with his mouth, kick really hard, and throw daggers with his toes. He ends up proving how capable he was as a World War II enemy of the hero Angel and an enemy of Wakanda, where he was completely destroyed by that era's Black Panther. I will talk about Armless Tiger Man whenever I have the chance, and I am not sorry about it. Kicking off the list at number 10 is Ultra Boy. This one is interesting, as you'd be totally forgiven for laughing at this character, but then you'd have to say sorry, as you just insulted an incredibly powerful dude. Ultra Boy, or as he is known in his civilian guise, Joe Na, possesses many of the same superpowers as Superboy, including superhuman speed, strength, flight, stamina, breath, vision, and invulnerability, which he gained from being swallowed by a massive space energy beast, which is essentially a giant space whale, hence the biblical Jonah name. While he was inside the energy beast's stomach, the radiation inside altered Jonah to give him superpowers. Now the only issue with Jonah, and it's a big one, is that he can only use one power at a time. This means that if he wants to fly through space at super speed, he must wear a spacesuit to survive in the cold vacuum, or when using his power for super strength, he is not invulnerable and can therefore get tired, feel muscular pain, or even pull a muscle. Jonah can switch these abilities almost instantly, but needs to make the conscious choice to do so, which honestly sounds kind of exhausting to me. I don't know. Number 9. Puck. The Alpha Flight member known as Puck was at one point literally just a little person who pushed himself to turn his body into an almost perfect physical specimen, able to lift hundreds of pounds and fight as well as his fellow Alpha Flighters. But this was before his Alpha Flight days. He had tons of adventures and his pretty basic but mysterious backstory added to his likability. But that ain't the dumb part. The dumb part came later on when it was revealed that Puck was actually much older than he seemed and was not actually born as a little person. Apparently, Puck used to be 7 feet tall and was a mercenary and adventurer who was born near the start of the 20th century. As a merc, he was hired to steal the Black Blade of Baghdad, and he totally got it, but then it unleashed an ancient magical being known as Black Razor. In order to defeat the being, Puck sucked him into his own body, becoming immortal in the process, but also losing half of his height and being trapped in the form of a little person. Why couldn't he just be a little person? I don't know. Number 8. Elongated Man. When Ralph Dibny was a tiny little Ralph Dibny, he saw a contortionist at a carnival and he was instantly down to be able to be like that guy. Everyone has their own thing, okay? And for Ralph, his thing was trying to figure out how someone could twist and fold their body into all sorts of shapes like that. Obsessed with learning the secrets of the contortionists for years and years, Ralph figured out that all the contortionists he observed drank the same drink. Now, it's not some crazy formula, it's not some kind of tea, but it was actually a popular soft drink known as Gingold. Now, Ralph knew for the most part that it was just a coincidence that they all drank the same drink, but that doesn't mean he wasn't gonna bet everything on it. Ralph literally taught himself chemistry, which should be the superpower itself, and he used his newly found chemistry skills to create a super concentrated extract from the fruit that was the basis and heart for Gingold, the gingo fruit. And what do you know? The super concentrated extract allowed him to make any part of his body stretch to ridiculous degrees. What's that I hear you say? Why yes, this does make no sense. Number 7. Wally West. Between roughly 1950 and 1970, 90% of superhero origin stories involved either chemicals or radiation. That's just how it worked. The Flash, we are all most familiar with, Barry Allen, became the fastest man alive when he was working at his forensics laboratory one night and a freak bolt of lightning struck his rack of chemicals and also Barry himself. In a stroke of luck, instead of completely frying the guy, the electricity from the lightning mixed with the unique and specific collection of chemicals and it gave Barry Allen super speed and access to the Speed Force. Now, while that origin may give you some pause, it's a classic origin story and most of us has just come to accept it. Now, 3 years after the Flash debuted, Barry Allen was visited by Wally West, the nephew of Barry's girlfriend, Iris. Wally was a big Flash fan, so Barry took him on a tour of his lab, the very lab where he was struck by lightning. Well, what do you know? A rogue bolt of lightning struck the very same rack of chemicals, all of which were still stored alongside each other, and then the lightning struck Wally West. The electricity mixed with this apparent unique collection of chemicals, unique enough to have it happen twice, and can you guess what happened? Yeah. Wally West gained super speed and access to the Speed Force. It's not like it doesn't make sense for an event to produce the same outcome, but I guess lightning really do be striking twice, huh? Or we got lazy with the writing. You pick. Number 6. Black Condor. A young Richard Gray, who would go on to become the flying superhero Black Condor, was the only survivor of an attack by Mongolian bandits on him and his archaeologist family. Now, stuck alone and in the wild, the little Richard was taken in by a family of condors. In the same way Mowgli was taken in by wolves and Tarzan was taken in by gorillas. Unfortunately, Richard wasn't a bird. He didn't have the musculature or the feathers or anything really that allows him to take flight like his new family could. But what are millions of years of evolution compared to the human brain and a little bit of practice? Richard spent most of his life studying the birds until he actually managed to teach himself how to just fly. Oh, there was also the exposure to a radioactive meteor, but he truly believed he had taught himself to fly. Once he was discovered by a missionary, Gray headed back home to the United States, where he became the flying adventurer known as the Black Condor. He went back specifically though to save a certain US senator, but when it was too late and he just happened to look exactly like the senator, he decided to abandon the name of Richard Gray and instead took the politician's identity. I think Richard Gray actually just might be insane. Yeah. Number 5, the Flaming Carrot. You would be forgiven for not knowing of the superhero known as the Flaming Carrot. For one, the Flaming Carrot has been published by different publishers from Aardvark Vanaheim, Renegade Press, and Dark Horse until 2005 when he began being published by Image Comics. The other reason is because, look at him! He's utterly ridiculous! His ridiculous look is matched by his equally ridiculous origin though. Essentially, the Flaming Carrot became a superhero after being bet to read thousands of comic books, specifically 5,000 comic books. Somehow, reading 5,000 comic books caused this unknown man to have brain damage, and then he appeared with a giant carrot for a mask, which had apparently an eternal flame on top of it, and he became a crime fighter. That's it. His gear and equipment is pretty equally nuts too. He has a utility belt which contains a yo-yo, a lucky rabbit's foot, laughing gas, magnifying glass, band-aids with little stars and rockets on them, silly putty, a skeleton key, stink bombs, a decoder badge, Pez candy, a magnet, a bubble pipe, super glue, a wishbone, trading cards, invisible ink, sneeze powder, and fizzies. That's his gear, alongside a nuclear-powered pogo stick and flippers that he wears at all times, just in case he has to swim. 'Cause you never know. Number 4, Whizzer. Bob Frank and his father Emil were traveling through Africa when they both unfortunately came down with an extremely deadly illness. Needing a transfusion in order to save their lives, Emil made it a mission to find someone who would be willing to help them and to save Bob's life. Apparently, there was absolutely no one who could help them out. But then, to make matters so much more worse, Bob also got bitten by a very deadly cobra. Bob was not having a good go of things here. When that happened, a mongoose then just showed up and it introduced that snake to the afterlife. Of course, this must have been a sign, and Emil had the idea to use the mongoose for the transfusion instead of a human to save his son's life. Don't worry about how a mongoose and a human are completely different. He was going to save his son's life, goddammit, okay? He was gonna do it. Now, not only did the mongoose DNA running through his veins actually save his life, but naturally this had the added benefit of allowing Bob to now run at super speed. Apparently this was also just common information, as Emil explained it as nonchalantly as pouring a cup of tea. Later on, it would be revealed that Frank had natural powers that were just jump-started by the addition of the mongoose DNA, but of course, that's only after the writers realized how that makes no sense. Number 3, Fat Man the Human Flying Saucer. Once upon a time, there was a pretty ordinary, wealthy man by the name of Van Crawford. Van was an expert on all things hobbies, and he owned a string of hobby shops. Well, Van here just happened to be waltzing along when he spied, in his little eye, an alien flying saucer crashing into the Earth. Now, being such a nice guy, Van decided to clear the space for the saucer to land, even pushing over a tree to do so. Very nice. Crawford came face to face with an alien, and it turns out that this alien was the flying saucer he had seen. This race of aliens seems to be able to transform from their normal form into a flying saucer, which is honestly a pretty spectacular ability to have. Luckily for Van though, after the alien gave him a drink that seemed to look and taste like a chocolate milkshake, he also gained this awesome and unique ability to transform himself into a human flying saucer. It's honestly really fun and kind of super charming that I really enjoy it, and I think we can all agree that it's kind of dumb still though. Number 2, Spider Ham. Hailing from a universe where all the Marvel characters are replaced with cartoon character animal versions of themselves, Peter Porker is Spider Ham, a pig. Peter Porker was actually born a spider named Peter, and he lived in the basement lab of May Porker, a scientist who had created the world's first atomic-powered hairdryer. May Porker, using the atomic hairdryer, accidentally irradiated herself, and then she bit Peter the spider, which made him turn into an anthropomorphic pig, just like her, only with the relative powers of a spider. In his premiere issue, he would go on to do battle with Hulk Bunny, created when Bruce Bunny was trapped in an arcade cabinet and bombarded with gamma radiation. I wish I was making this all up, I really do, but it's also kind kind of awesome. Spider-Ham has most of the same abilities as 616 Spider-Man, only he has the rather unique ability called Spider Nonsense, which basically allows him to be more and more cartoony the more danger he is in, which is the perfect reason to have the wackiest nonsense happen that will save his piggy hide in some of the most imaginative ways possible. In at number 1, the Red Bee. The Red Bee from DC Comics comes from a time in comic books and the superhero genre when superheroes were really just pulp vigilantes who had some kind of really minor edge over the criminals they would be thwarting. Rick Raleigh was the assistant to the district attorney, and with this look at the criminal justice system, he grew tired of seeing criminals escape justice either through technicalities or because the court system was just too slow. Growing fed up, Rick decided he would create a costumed identity to bring criminals to justice. But as a normal, pretty intelligent guy with a flawless moral compass and a decent right hook, he didn't really have an edge over those he was facing. Enter Michael. Michael was a trained bee, like the insect that Rick would keep in his belt buckle. Rick was a unique kind of bee though. As we know, bees don't survive for too long after they sting someone. Luckily though, Michael had the advantage of being able to sting multiple times. Michael, coupled with Rick's fists and other equipment, would be the bane of villains everywhere, and thus the Red Bee was born.
Number 10, Hitmonkey. Hitmonkey, oh man, I love Hitmonkey. Initially, Hitmonkey was just a monkey living up in the mountains until a human assassin wandered wounded into his clan. They took in the human and nursed him back to health. The monkey who had become Hitmonkey was nervous about the man's presence and at one point rebelled against his clan for their decision to continue to offer refuge to the assassin. Monkey violently struck out and was banished as a result. However, during his time away, he spotted other armed men in the wilderness and rushed back to warn his clan, but unfortunately he got there too late. They had all been killed in the attack, with the assassin also dying. Swearing to get revenge, Hitmonkey was born that day, as he wielded the assassin's guns and would continue to be guided by the spirit of the dead assassin, who helped him on his quest and also sought to resolve his own unfinished business through Hitmonkey. And friends, before we move on to our next spot on this list, if you love weird, wacky lists like this, click that subscribe button. We do a lot of cool stuff like this, and you're not gonna want to miss it when it does pop up. Number 9, Green Lantern. In part 2, we talked about the original origin of Alan Scott's Green Lantern, but now we're gonna talk about the amazing and also unbelievable origin of one of the newer Green Lanterns, Sojourner Malene. Jo has a fascinating origin in the sense that she was chosen to become Green Lantern for a sector of space known only as the Far Sector. That's how far out it is. It does not have a designated number, it's just Far Sector. Also interesting and unique is that Jo's Green Lantern ring that she was given is a special kind that is basically self-charging, doesn't need a battery, making it perfect for cases out in remote areas of space. However, while this is a great strength and some would consider this ring to be like one of the strongest, it can also be somewhat of a weakness because it actually takes time to recharge by itself, meaning that Jo has to be a little bit more conservative and creative at times when using her powers in battle, being careful not to fully tap herself out unless, you know, she absolutely has to, but she has to make those choices. That's what makes it so exciting. Number 8, Elasti-Woman. Whether we're talking comics or the live-action Doom Patrol series, Elasti-Woman has a pretty interesting origin. She was initially a Hollywood actress, Rita Farr. In the Doom Patrol series, it's implied that she was cursed for being rude to locals while on set, falling into a body of water where she was exposed to a toxic gas that left her with the uncontrollable ability to shapeshift. Ultimately, this kind of ruined her career. In the comics, it was exposure to toxic gas from a volcano while on a shoot in Africa that gave her this ability, also, of course, ruining her career. She would end up joining Niles Calder's team of misfits known as the Doom Patrol. In the live-action series, Rita constantly struggles to control her abilities. In the comics, she also becomes the adopted mother of Garfield Logan's Beast Boy, who we often nickname Gar, after marrying Steve Dayton's Mento, another member of the Doom Patrol team. Number 7, Rogue. Well, when it comes to Rogue, she's a pretty tragic and honestly pretty wild backstory. Initially, we knew her as a villain in the comics, but this wouldn't last too long, with Rogue eventually leaving her adoptive mother's sides and joining the X-Men. From the beginning of her origins, Rogue's backstory has been pretty wild. She was initially born into a hippie commune out in the wilderness. Her mother ended up disappearing in a mystical ritual when she was young, which left Anna Marie to be raised by her stern Aunt Carrie, Mary, her mother Priscilla's sister, and her often absent father, Owen. Eventually, Anna Marie would run away from home, gaining the nickname of Rogue because, she kept to herself, which would eventually also become her codename as a super. She would end up being taken in by Mystique and her wife Destiny, with the two villainesses becoming, you guessed it, Rogue's adoptive mothers. Initially, Rogue's powers manifested during her first kiss with her childhood crush, Cody Robbins. As a result, Cody's life energy was drained from the physical contact and he was left comatose. Thanks to this very traumatizing experience, for years, Rogue struggled to control her powers, often choosing to wear clothes that fully covered her body for fear of accidentally hurting those closest to her. It wasn't until recently in the comics that she managed to gain better control over her mutant abilities when she finally confronted her fears, realizing that it was actually her own fear that had been preventing her from controlling her powers the whole time. Number 6. Oracle. When you think about it, Oracle's origins are pretty insane. I still can't believe this happened, considering the story that her origin comes from is not even fully canon. Oracle is Barbara Gordon, and we aren't talking about Barbara Gordon's initially confusing connection to Commissioner Jim Gordon and her origin as Batgirl here, but instead her transformation from Batgirl to Oracle with her Oracle origin. This all went down in Killing Joke, initially intended to be a one-off story that was not part of the main continuity canon, and for the most part, it really isn't. However, in the story, Barbara Gordon is visiting with her father, Jim Gordon. Dressed as a civilian, she answers the door and is shot through the spine by the Joker. And for some reason, this is the part of the story that was kept and incorporated into canon. The silver lining is it gave us Oracle, I suppose, which is a super cool character, but the unfortunate thing is it created a lot of trauma and extra struggle for Babs, with her also having to retire as Batgirl for quite some time. Number 5. Red Hood. We're not talking about Jason Todd's origins as Robin here, instead we're talking about his origin as Red Hood. And I know that some may consider Red Hood to be more a villain at times or anti-hero, but 1. Anti-heroes are still also heroes, and 2. I would consider Todd's Red Hood more of a straight up hero right now than, well, anything else. I mean, he did switch from guns to a crowbar, it's still pretty brutal, but hey, progress. Jason Todd became the Red Hood after he was believed to have been killed by the Joker. First of all, this death was actually voted on by fans, which is a pretty wild marketing strategy and pretty crazy that that's part of this origin. And after he died, his death was considered to be one of the actual mainstay deaths in comics, with the 3 permanent deaths in comics at one point being considered to be Uncle Ben, Bucky Barnes, and of course Jason Todd. Evidently not so permanent, as 2 out of 3 of those characters have now, at this point in time, ended up returning, albeit, after a long period, I will say, of staying dead, unlike most other fallen heroes and characters. Jason returned, however, as the villain Red Hood. In the story, it was explained that he was revived via time spent in basically the Lazarus pits, being taken in and trained by Talia al Ghul and the League of Assassins. That's kind of like how he recovered and how he became Red Hood a little bit. However, do you even know how any of that was made possible? What was actually a change made to the universe that was one of many explained by Superboy Prime punching reality. Yeah, even more bizarre, the punch actually happened in terms of the comics continuity, in terms of their release dates, after Todd returned. But that's explained by the fact that Superboy Prime's punch actually affected all of reality throughout time. So while it did happen afterward in terms of when the comics were released, it affected the past, which means Jason Todd actually came back to life 6 months after his death in the adjusted canon, which would actually even be like way back when. So people were like, but didn't this happen after? And it's like, yes, but like this actually doesn't even, it affects way in the past. Really? Oh, Superboy Prime, punch in reality. Number 4. Ben Reilly. Ben Reilly is a superhero who we would often come to know mainly as Scarlet Spider, but before that we actually just knew him for a while as Spider-Man. He is the clone of Peter Parker, who was created by the Jackal, although there was a period of time where Peter and Ben were not sure which one of them was the clone, and it was even believed that Ben may actually be the original, with Peter being the clone. Beyond that, Ben Reilly, while being created by Miles Warren's Jackal and tormented by the villain, would also at one point go on to adopt the name for himself, becoming the Jackal, which is pretty messed up when you think about everything that's happened to Ben Reilly. Number 3, Robot Man. Cliff Steele is DC's Robot Man. For those unfamiliar, he is one of the mainstays on DC's oddball superhero team, the Doom Patrol. Whether we're talking about the live-action adaptation or the comic book origin for this character, both are honestly pretty similar and pretty weird. Basically, Cliff Steele was a NASCAR driver, additionally in the comics an obsessive thrill seeker, not exclusively a race car driver alone, and during a car accident his body ends up being destroyed. With his brain still surviving, however, his life was saved by Niles Calder, who gave him a cybernetic body, which is how he became Robot Man. Unfortunately, a much more rudimentary robot body though than other superheroic cyborgs like, well, Cyborg. In the live-action series Doom Patrol, Cliff's origin is made even more unbelievable, and we learn that this version of the accident happened not on the track, but after the race while on the way home. Cliff had been having an affair and his wife found out, but at the same time he also found out that his wife had found out, and then so she had had an affair and she let him know kind of in the worst time possible. She revealed this to him during his race, causing him to almost get in a life-threatening car crash. The two, however, after the race decided to renew their commitment to one another and ultimately try to salvage their marriage. I guess, you know, a near-death experience can do that to you. While on their way home with their young daughter Clara in the back seat, Cliff ended up getting into an accident tragically with a large logging truck. The accident cost his wife her life, Cliff his body, and left his daughter alive but severely traumatized. Even more wild, in the show, we'd actually later learn that Cliff getting into this accident was kind of all part of Niles Calder's experiments as he sought to find a way to become immortal. Now that is unbelievable. Number 2, Longshot. Longshot is the son of Shatterstar, and he's from Mojo World, so he's pretty much as weird as it gets just with that. Longshot was basically created as a clone of Shatterstar who ended up being sent back in time to the Mojoverse by Mephisto. But it also gets even weirder for this character when you factor in his jumps back and forth from the Mojoverse to Earth and back again, and it gets even weirder when you factor in Shatterstar's origins. Number 1, Shatterstar. As I said, to really appreciate the mind-blowing nature of Longshot's origins, you need to know Shatterstar. So Shatterstar is actually the biological son of Longshot and another mutant with a weird origin story, Dazzler, who we talked about on part 2 of this series. Which of course means that Shatterstar and Longshot are in essence one another's fathers, in a way, with both their origins being tied up in what I would call a time paradox. I think that's what that is for sure. Longshot is Shatterstar's father, but after traveling back in time, Shatterstar's DNA would be taken and used to create Longshot, in essence also making him Longshot's genetic father. So yeah, they're both each other's fathers, they both exist, and they're both really confusing.
There's no better place to start than with Spider-Woman. Born in 1924, a little tiny Jessica Drew traveled with her parents Jonathan and Miriam to Mount Wundagore. There, her father Jonathan conducted genetics research with one Dr. Herbert Wyndham, who would later go on to become the incredibly powerful High Evolutionary. At 7 years old, Jessica contracted uranium poisoning from her father's work, but Jonathan and Wyndham managed to actually save her life using a spider-derived serum and combining it with years and years of hibernation in a genetic accelerator. Jessica then spent decades in stasis, receiving subliminal education via special tapes, kind of like how baby Superman was instilled with his values and all that jazz when traveling through space to Earth. When she finally awakened, she was cured and had only aged up to her early teens. She also discovered that she now possessed superhuman powers as a result of the combination of the radiation exposure and the spider serum. But then, later, it was said that her actual origin was because of a failed experiment that exposed Jessica's pregnant mom to radiation, which managed to give Jessica spider powers when she was born. Either way, when she first showed up in comic books in Marvel Spotlight number 32, she had become an agent of Hydra and was sent on a mission to try and wipe out the director of S.H.I.E.L.D., Nick Fury. Luckily, he brought her to the light side. But moving on from Spider-Woman to something completely insane, Bob Frank and his father Emil were traveling through Africa when they both unfortunately came down with an extremely deadly illness. Needing a transfusion in order to save their lives, Emil made it a mission to find someone who would be willing to help them and to save Bob's life. Apparently, there was absolutely no one who could help them out, but then, to make matters so much worse, Bob also also got bitten by a very deadly cobra. Bob was not having a good time. When that happened, a mongoose then just showed up and it introduced that snake to the afterlife. Of course, this must have been a sign, and Emil had the idea to use this mongoose for the transfusion instead of a regular human being to save his son's life. Not only did the mongoose DNA running through his veins somehow actually save his life, but naturally, this had the added benefit of allowing Bob to now run at super speed. Apparently, this was just common information, as Emil explained it as nonchalantly as pouring a cup of tea. Later on, it would be revealed that Frank had natural powers that were just jump-started by the addition of the mongoose DNA, but of course, that's only after they realized how that makes no sense. But moving on from that, a young Richard Gray, who would go on to become the flying superhero known as Black Condor, was the only survivor of an attack by Mongolian bandits on him and his archaeologist family. Now, stuck alone and in the wild, the little Richard was taken in by a family in the same kind of way that Mowgli was taken in by wolves and Tarzan was taken in by gorillas. Unfortunately, Richard was not a bird though. He didn't have the musculature or the feathers or anything really that allowed him to take flight like his new family could. But what are millions of years of evolution compared to the human brain and a little bit of practice? Richard spent most of his life studying the birds until he actually managed to just teach himself how to fly. Oh, there was also the exposure to a radioactive meteor that may have had something to do with it, but he truly believed that he had taught himself to fly. Once he was discovered by a missionary, Gray headed back home to the United States, where he became the flying adventurer known as the Black Condor. He went back specifically to save a certain US senator, but when he was actually too late, he just happened to look exactly like the senator, so he decided to abandon the name of Richard Gray and instead took the politician's identity. I think Richard Gray might actually just be insane. Now, between roughly 1950 and 1970, 90% of superhero origin stories involved either chemicals or radiation. That's just kind of how it worked. The Flash we are all most familiar with, Barry Allen, became the fastest man alive when he was working at his forensic laboratory one night. A bolt of lightning struck his rack of chemicals and also Barry himself. In a stroke of luck, instead of completely frying the guy, the electricity from the lightning mixed with the unique and specific collection of chemicals, and it gave Barry Allen super speed and access to the Speed Force. While that may give you some pause, it's a classic origin story and most of us have just come to accept it now. 3 years after The Flash debuted, Barry Allen was visited by Wally West, the nephew of Barry's girlfriend, Iris West. Wally was a big fan of The Flash, so Barry took him on a tour of his lab, the very lab where he was struck by lightning and gained his powers. Well, what do you know? A rogue bolt of lightning struck the very same rack of chemicals, all of which were still stored alongside each other, and then the lightning struck Wally West. The electricity mixed with this apparent unique collection of chemicals, and can you guess what happened? Yeah, Wally West gained super speed and access to the Speed Force. It's not like it doesn't make sense for the same event to produce the same outcome, but I guess lightning really do be striking twice, I guess. Or we got lazy with the writing. I'll let you pick. But while you're deciding on that, did you ever just randomly, accidentally drink a formula for creating super plastic thinking that it was soda instead? Has that ever happened to you? No, it probably hasn't, and if it did, you'd probably need to be rushed to the hospital. That's because we live in the real world. But in DC Comics, all logic just goes out the window. So when Chuck Tane mistook a super plastic formula for soda pop and downed the whole thing down his gullet, instead of needing urgent medical attention, he instead gained the ability to inflate himself to a ridiculous degree and bounce around with enough speed and velocity to actually make him incredibly efficient in combat. Chuck went on to become a key member of the 30th century's Legion of Superheroes as Bouncing Boy, and I think I've said enough about him. Alan Scott was the first ever original Green Lantern, but while the other lanterns that we have come into contact with were test pilots, veteran soldiers, and comic book artists who were chosen to become members of an intergalactic corps of space cops, Alan Scott was a train engineer, saved from what would have been a fatal train accident by a magical green engineer's lantern lantern made thousands of years ago in China out of a meteorite. But get this, the meteorite in question actually housed the spirit known as the Star Heart that needed to fulfill a prophecy to bring death, life, and power. Apparently, the spirit had already, at some point in the past, brought death and life already, so when it came upon Alan Scott, it was time to bring power in the form of his unique magical power ring. The funny thing was that even when DC Comics created Hal Jordan and the Green Lantern Corps, Alan's origins remained exactly the same. Only change came when Jeff Johns made it so that the Star Heart used to be an experiment that the Guardians of Oa were unable to contain. As it made its way to Earth in the form of a meteorite to one day save Alan Scott, it took some inspiration from the Green Lantern Corps, seemingly influencing Scott to take the Green Lantern name. But the weirdest thing about this whole origin is that Alan Scott's main weakness is wood. What's up with that? I don't know. But from one strange lantern to another, the son of a poor farmer, Daniel Cormack was raised in Ireland. Like most Irish people, he came into contact with the sea. They're basically an Irish fairy people, some of whom he managed to become really good pals with. Now it turns out that the fairies actually really liked Daniel because Maeve, the fairy queen, granted him a magical lantern as repayment for his friendship to the fairy people. The power of this lantern is interesting. It slowly waxes until its peak at midnight and then slowly wanes after until it is at its weakest at noon. Now with his lantern, Jack is able to fly, teleport himself or others, generate blasts of energy, create illusions, generate fog, change the size of enemies and bind them inside the lantern, and he can also become superhumanly strong and durable. That's a great set of powers. Now using the lantern, he took up the identity of Jack-o'-lantern and became Ireland's premier superhero, eventually joining the Global Guardians, even getting 2 successors in the form of Mardrin Noronsa and eventually Liam McHugh. Now, coming up in our third to last spot today, a lot of comic book superhero origins have to do with some kind of accident. A freak lightning bolt, an interrupted gamma explosion, an alien plane crash, it's just how it goes. But for professional saxophone blower Johnny Domino, aka the Nightman, his mysterious abilities to hear evil thoughts, see at night, no longer require sleep, psychically control a length of rope, and produce lightning through a connection to Celtic magic, all came about when he was just driving his Miata through the San Francisco Bay Area and an out-of-control streetcar, which got hit by magic lightning, crashed into him. Johnny Domino ended up in a coma for several weeks, and when he finally came back to, boom, powers. Not a bad deal until you learn that the big old downside to all of his powers is that he is now a cannibal. Nightman needs to literally consume a broth consisting of a handful of human organs every couple of months in order for him to stay alive. Reading that made me nauseous. Also, the Nightman even had his own short-lived TV show, and if you haven't seen the intro for that show, trust me, you gotta check it out. And in for our runner-up spot today, when Ralph Dibny of DC Comics was a tiny little Ralph Dibny, he saw a contortionist at a carnival and he was instantly down to be just like that guy. Everyone has their thing, and for Ralph, his thing was trying to figure out how someone could twist and fold their body into all sorts of shapes like that guy could. Obsessed with learning the secrets of the contortionists, for years and years, Ralph figured out that all the contortionists he observed drank the same drink. Not some crazy formula, not some kind of tea, but it was actually a popular soft drink known as Gingle. Now, Ralph knew for the most part that it was just a coincidence that they all drank the same drink, but that doesn't mean he wasn't gonna bet everything he had on it. Ralph ended up literally teaching himself chemistry, which should be the superpower here, and then he used these newly found chemistry abilities to create a super concentrated extract from the fruit that was the basis and heart for the Gingle drink, the Gingo fruit. What do you know? The super concentrated extract allowed him to make any part of his body stretch to ridiculous degrees. What's that, I hear you say? Yeah, it doesn't make any sense. You're right. But finally, coming in at our number 1 spot today, The Flaming Carrot has been published by different publishers all over the place, so I'd forgive you for not knowing who he is. From Aardvark, Vanaheim, Renegade Press, and Dark Horse Comics until 2005, when he began being published by Image Comics. Other reason that you may not know who he is because look at him. He's utterly ridiculous. His utterly ridiculous look is matched by his equally ridiculous origin story. Essentially, the Flaming Carrot became a superhero after deciding to read 5,000 comic books in a row. Curiously, for him, reading that many comics caused the unknown man to get brain damage. He then donned a giant carrot for a mask, which was topped with an eternal flame, and he became a crime fighter. His gear and equipment is pretty equally nuts. He has a utility belt which carries a yo-yo, Lucky Rabbit's foot, laughing gas, a magnifying glass, band-aids with little stars and rockets on them, silly putty, a skeleton key, stink bombs, a decoder badge, Pez candy, a magnet, a bubble pipe, super glue, a wishbone, training cards, invisible ink, sneeze powder, and fizzies. That's his gear, alongside a nuclear-powered pogo stick, which is in his mask, and flippers that he wears at all times, just in case he has to swim. Number 10, the Creeper. Jack Ryder was a super outspoken TV news guy in Gotham City. Now on TV, he's the host of a show where he tries to stir the pot to get everyone talking about topics like super advanced medical science and nanotech. Ryder was doing some investigating into some new tech called nanocell therapy created by one Dr. Vincent Yates. He discovered an experimental mixture which enabled the body to regenerate from practically any injury of any kind. Unfortunately though, Jack tried to steal Yates' tech at the same time as a group of mobsters, and so to keep the tech safe, the good old doctor injected his last unstable sample of nanocells into Jack Ryder. Then, right after that happens, the gangsters grant Jack a one-way ticket to the afterlife and blow his head off. Now, most of us, well, we'd be lights out and game over by that, but thanks to the nanocells reacting with his body's chemistry, Jack is completely resurrected with the ability to turn into the Creeper. This bright yellow-skinned, green-haired madman with hypnotic intimidation powers, a pain-inducing laugh, and superhuman agility, strength, speed, stamina, and enhanced reflexes. Number 9, Ultra Boy. Ultra Boy, or as he is known in his civilian guise, Jonah, possesses many of the same powers as Superboy, including superhuman speed, strength, flight, stamina, breath, vision, and invulnerability, which he gained from being swallowed by a massive space energy beast, which is essentially a giant space whale, hence the biblical Jonah name. While he was inside the energy beast's stomach, the radiation inside altered Jonah to give him superpowers. The only issue with Jonah, and it's a big one, is that he can only use one power at a time. This means that if he wants to fly through space at super speed, he must wear a spacesuit to survive in the cold vacuum, or when using his power for super strength, he is not invulnerable and can therefore get tired, feel muscular pain, or even pull a muscle. Jonah can switch these abilities almost instantly, but he needs to make the conscious choice to do so, which honestly sounds exhausting. Number 8, Jack-o'-lantern. The son of a poor farmer, Daniel Cormack was raised in Ireland. Now, like most Irish people, Daniel came into contact with the Irish fairy people, some of whom he managed to become good pals with. It turns out that the fairies actually really liked Daniel because Maeve, the fairy queen, granted him a magical lantern as repayment for his friendship to the fairies. The power of this lantern is pretty interesting. It slowly waxes until its peak at midnight and then slowly wanes until it's at its weakest at noon. With his lantern, Jack is able to fly, teleport himself or others, generate blasts of energy, create illusions, generate fog, change the size of enemies, and bind them inside the lantern. And he can also become superhumanly strong and durable. Using the lantern, he took up the identity of Jack-o'-lantern and became Ireland's premier superhero, eventually joining the Global Guardians, even getting 2 successors in the form of Marvin Noronha and eventually Liam McHugh. Number 7, the Red Bee. The Red Bee from DC Comics comes from a time in comic books and the superhero genre when superheroes were really just pulp vigilantes who had some kind of really minor edge over the criminals they would be thwarting. Rick Raleigh was the assistant to the district attorney, and with this look at the criminal justice system, he grew tired of seeing criminals escape justice either through technicalities or because the court system was just too slow. Growing fed up with this, Rick decided he would create a costumed identity to bring criminals to justice. But as a normal, intelligent guy with a flawless moral compass and a decent right hook, he didn't really have an edge over those he was facing. Enter Michael. Michael was a trained bee, like the insect that Rick would keep in his belt buckle. Michael was a unique kind of bee though. As we know, bees don't survive for too long after they sting someone, and luckily, Michael had the advantage of being able to sting people multiple times. Michael, coupled with Rick's fists and other equipment, would be the bane of villains everywhere, and thus, the Red Bee was born. Number 6. Cloud. There's really no other way to say this. Marvel's Cloud is a sentient nebula hundreds of thousands of years away from becoming a star. That's actually what they are. Cloud began to notice stars disappearing from the space surrounding it, which caused the nebula to feel fear for some reason. And because of that, a newly emerged cosmic cube known as Cubic was attracted to Cloud and came to their aid. Now, hoping that the Earth's heroes could somehow do something to help, Cloud made their way to our planet only to inadvertently cause a young couple, Carol Faber and Danny Milligan, to get distracted while driving and crash their car. When Cloud attempted to help the couple, they tried to enter into their minds but were instead bombarded with the unique human psyche. For some reason, this transformed Cloud into a replica of Carol, with no memories of their former self. This made Cloud the perfect target for the Secret Empire, which is a cult-like offshoot of Hydra that then weaponized Cloud to suit their own nefarious ends before she was eventually taken on to the Defenders team. Number 5. Elongated Man. When Ralph Dibny was a tiny little Ralph Dibny, he saw a contortionist at a carnival and he was instantly down to be able to be like that guy. Everyone had their thing, and for Ralph, his thing was trying to figure out how someone could twist and fold their body into all sorts of shapes like a contortionist could. Obsessed with learning the secrets of the contortionists, for years and years, Ralph figured out that all the contortionists he observed drank the same drink. Not some crazy formula, not some kind of tea, but it was actually a popular soft drink known as Gingold. Now, Ralph knew for the most part that it was just a coincidence that they all drank the same drink. But that doesn't mean he wasn't gonna bet everything he had on it. Ralph literally taught himself chemistry, and he used his newly found chemistry skills to create a super concentrated extract from the fruit that was the basis and heart for Gingold, the Gingo fruit. And what do you know? The super concentrated extract allowed him to make any part of his body stretch to a ridiculous degree. What's that, I hear you say? Why yes, this does make no sense. Number 4. Flex Mentallo. The Doom Patrol is a unique team to say the least. Their whole thing is that their powers are weird enough that they were shunned, made fun of, etc, and so they pulled together to make their own team. A bunch of them could make this list, but the one member who I think deserves to make it onto this list is Flex Mentallo. He first appeared in Doom Patrol Volume 2, number 35 in 1990, and was essentially created by another metahuman by the name of Wallace Sage. Wallace has the ability to take any drawing he makes and turn it into real life. With that power, he created Flex. Now, Flex himself was given the mysterious and kind of hilarious power of muscle mystery, which allows him to alter reality by flexing different muscles. For example, flexing his scalenus minimus, Flex has the ability to survive in the vacuum of space for an extended amount of time. His other powers include enhanced senses, mind control, precognition, reality alteration, superhuman durability, superhuman strength, and telepathy, all by flexing different muscles. Number 3. Puck. The Alpha Flight member known as Puck was at one point literally just a little person who pushed himself to turn his body into an almost perfect physical specimen, able to lift hundreds of pounds and fight as well as his fellow alpha flighters. But this was before his alpha flight days. He had tons of adventures, and his pretty basic but mysterious backstory added to his likability. Now the dumb part came much later on, when it was revealed that Puck was actually much older than he seemed and was not actually born as a little person. Apparently, Puck used to be 7 feet tall and was a mercenary and adventurer who was born near the start of the 20th century. As a merc, he was hired to steal the Black Blade of Baghdad, and he totally did it, but then it unleashed an ancient magical being known as Black Razor. In order to defeat Black Razor, Puck sucked him into his own body, becoming immortal in the process, but also losing half of his height and being trapped in the form of a little person. Why? I don't know. Number 2. Wizard. Bob Frank and his father Emil were traveling through Africa when they both unfortunately came down with an extremely deadly illness. Now, needing a transfusion in order to save their lives, Emil made it a mission to find someone who would be willing to help them and to save Bob's life. Apparently, there was absolutely no one who could help them out. But then, to make matters so much more worse, Bob also got bitten by a very deadly cobra. Bob was not having a good go of things here, and when that happened, a mongoose then just happened to show up and it introduced that snake to the afterlife. Now of course, this must have been a sign, and Emil had the bright idea to use this mongoose for the blood transfusion to save his own son's life. Don't worry about how a mongoose and a human are completely different, he was going to save his son's life. Not only did the mongoose DNA running through his son's veins save his life, but naturally, this had the added benefit of allowing Bob to now run at super speed? Apparently though, this was just common information, as Emil explained it as nonchalantly as pouring a cup of tea. Later on, it would be revealed that Frank had natural powers that were just jump-started by the addition of the mongoose DNA, but of course, that's only after they realized how that makes no sense. And in at number 1 today is Liesel Pawn. The Green Lantern Corps, actually every Lantern Corps really, has members of all different shapes and sizes. But what utterly baffles me personally is knowing that the Green Lanterns have a super intelligent, justice-seeking smallpox virus on their roster. Assigned to Sector 119, Liesel Pawn wasn't really able to join the other Lanterns in team meetings on the Green Lantern world because this Lantern risked infecting all the others. Liesel Pawn's partner in Sector 119 was called Remus. Now, I say was because Remus was a fatal victim of Despotellus, another sentient virus and also part of the Yellow Lantern Corps, the Sinestro Corps. Despotellus infected 85% of the planets in Sector 119, which caused the passing of Liesel's partner. Despotellus then went on to infect Guy Gardner. Now, wanting revenge for the attack on her sector and the loss of Remus, Liesel Pawn was injected into Guy Gardner and then did battle with Despotellus inside of Guy Gardner, defeating and capturing the Yellow Lantern virus, who Liesel brought back to Oa for a Green Lantern doctor to work on a vaccine to wipe out Despotellus for good. And that's all I know about this character. Coming in at number 10 today is Galactus. Being one of the constants in Marvel Comics since 1965, Galactus is a big name in comic books, and yet I feel like there's a good chunk of people who may not know his origins. Galactus was known originally as the space explorer Galen from a planet called Ta. The civilization he belongs to was the most advanced of any of the known universes at that time, and Galen was a genetically engineered child of one of Ta's greatest scientists. But Galen and his society existed in the previous iteration of the Marvel multiverse, the Sixth Cosmos. Essentially, in Marvel, the universe starts off as a cosmic egg, or a sphere of disorganized, dense, compact matter. This sphere undergoes a big bang that hurls the matter outwards, where it eventually condenses into stars, planets, moons, and all that good stuff. It all expands in size for billions of years, and then it begins to go in reverse, undergoing a quote crunch over the next billions of years, all heading toward a central central point in the universe where it all restarts again. That, or it was a giant entity known as the Black Winter. Either way, Galen and the surviving people of Ta attempted to face the end of the universe by leaving their planet on a ship. Sadly, the cataclysm caught up with the ship and everyone passed except for Galen, who was approached by the sentience of the universe, who merged his power with Galen, allowing him to survive as Galactus, the Devourer of Worlds, in the next cosmos. This one. Number 9. Parasite, Joshua Michael Allen. When talking about the origin story of the villain Parasite, there are a few different stories we can tell, but they're all nuts. The most current version of Parasite is a guy who used to go by the name Joshua Michael Allen. Josh was originally a bike courier from Metropolis, but his life changed when he very randomly came face to face with a massive green booger-looking monster. He was having a rough time, and so he kinda snapped, attacking the monster and getting a massive electric shock. He then lost consciousness. When he came to, he was diagnosed as suffering from alien flu. He also lost his job and got dumped by his GF in the same stroke, so that's pretty sad. It was then that he was called into Star Labs to be checked for the virus. All of a sudden, a random explosion at the lab took out everyone nearby and transformed Joshua into a purple grotesque monster called Parasite. As Parasite, he uncontrollably, and suffering from a crazy level of hunger, drained the energy of people around him, leaving them as husks. However, the Man of Steel came to intervene, and when Parasite touched Superman, he gained way more energy than he had from anyone before. From that point forward, leeching metahuman powers became his new obsession. Number 8. Solomon Grundy. Cyrus Gold lived a pretty miserable life. His father, Gold Sr., had moved to Gotham City to gain fame and fortune, and failed miserably. The elder Gold began to use his family as a way to vent off the hate he felt towards his superiors. For years, the young Cyrus Gold was mistreated, coming to a head when his mother packed her belongings, kissed him goodbye, and abandoned him alone with his horrible father. Not too much later, Cyrus snuck down to the docks to watch his father work when a crate fell on top of Cyrus Gold's father, taking him out of the picture instantly. Now, Cyrus Gold was all alone. Forced to survive on nothing, he swore to himself to make his own riches and power. And miraculously, a mysterious stranger offered Cyrus the deal of a lifetime. He could become rich and powerful if he only served the stranger until the day he died. Cyrus Gold shook the stranger's hand, and what do you know? He soon became wealthy and powerful, but by ways not very honest. He took people's lives, including his mother and various people who had bullied him in the past. He stole, and he became a horrible mobster, notorious for dumping the bodies of his victims in the waters of Slaughter Swamp. During this period, Cyrus somehow got married and had a little boy and a little girl as well. Initially, they were a happy family, but Cyrus became a worse and worse husband until, in a fit of rage, Cyrus took his wife's life. A mob formed and chased him into the swamps. Now, Cyrus didn't want to go by the mob's hands, and subsequently, he stuck himself through the heart, sinking into the cursed waters of Slaughter Swamp. Now, the swamp, filled with unknown acids and chemicals, bonded to the preserving corpse of Cyrus Gold, fusing his body through time with wood, stone, and pretty much anything else that was unlucky enough to fall into the swamp. 50 years later, after his passing, something happened. In the dead of night, a moaning was heard. The waters rippled and parted as a hideously decayed white hand reached out. That night, from the remains of a selfish and evil man, came a hulking avatar of the Grey, known only as Solomon Grundy, naming himself after a famous poem. That was a long one, I'm sorry. Number 7. Killer Croc. As with most DC characters, Killer Croc, aka Waylon Jones, has two main origin stories: the pre- and post-Flashpoint origins, with some minor differences. Born in a slum in Tampa, Florida, Waylon was born with a congenital medical condition that caused him to have scaly, thick skin and reptilian features, which led to the Croc part of his name. This is true in both origins, although post-Flashpoint this condition was given a bit more depth as Waylon tried to scrub away the scales for years. Now, with his mother passing away from his birth and his father abandoning the little Croc, Waylon was raised by his aunt, but she had a bit of a problem with the drinky. As a teenager, Croc had no friends and was bullied for his medical condition, as is usually the case in a villain origin story. So, instead, Waylon grew up and found himself literally wrestling alligators as part of carnivals. Post-Flashpoint, this was the Gotham Circus, where he even came into contact with the Flying Graysons. This was where he earned the name Killer Croc, but carnivals aren't exactly swimming in the cash, and post-Flashpoint his boss was keeping his money, prompting Croc to bite off his arm. Croc soon realized that there was more money to be made in crime, so he set out to become Gotham's most powerful crime lord, taking out other rising criminals, gathering up some henchmen, and seizing control of the Tobacconist Club and or the Gotham City sewers, bringing him into conflict with the Batman. Number 6, Professor Zoom. Hunter Zolomon was already starting off life with a bit of a disadvantage, and that's because his dad was a notorious killer who lost his life to the police after taking the life of Hunter's mother. So yeah, it was pretty bad. Trying to move on with his life though, Hunter became obsessed with understanding the criminal mind, studying psychology and criminology in college, and eventually joining the FBI alongside his girlfriend, whom he later married. Nice. Unfortunately though, during one case, Hunter made a bad call regarding a criminal they were after, and it resulted in Ashley's father losing his life. Hunter actually was correct, but the whole thing was orchestrated by Reverse Flash, Eobard Thawne. Ashley left Hunter, and the FBI terminated his employment, leaving Hunter with a damaged knee due to the case, and a cane for walking. After getting a job in Keystone City as a profiler, he was eventually paralyzed by Gorilla Grodd. After forming a relationship with Wally West, Hunter begged Flash to go back in time and change his life, but the speedster refused. Hunter took things into his own hands and stole the cosmic treadmill, which exploded, granting Hunter the power to live between the seconds of time and making him Zoom, the second Reverse Flash. Number 5, Superboy Prime. Superboy Prime was initially a normal child on an Earth known as Prime Earth that didn't really have any superheroes. Or they had superheroes in the exact same way that we do, in comic books and entertainment media. This young future supervillain was adopted by Jerry and Naomi Kent, who named him Clark, which was both Naomi's middle name and the fictional comic book character Superman in their world. Well, it turns out that Clark really was Kal-El, teleported to Earth Prime before the Krypton of this universe was destroyed when its sun went kaboom. Discovering his Kryptonian abilities thanks to the passing of Halley's Comet, while coincidentally dressed as Superman at a Halloween party, this Superboy left his Prime Earth reality shortly afterwards. As it happens, the Earth 1 Superman just happened to be passing by and asked him to join other heroes in protecting reality itself from the Anti-Monitor during the Crisis on Infinite Earths. His reward, along with Alexander Luthor Jr. of Earth 3, was a chance to escape to a heavenly pocket dimension where he doesn't age. Unfortunately, being able to watch the post-crisis Earth that was getting darker and darker without being able to be a part of it, losing his childhood, knowing that he could never grow up to be Superman, his idol of Earth 2, and feeling like the heroes of post-crisis Earth were absolute dog water, Superboy Prime became a pretty bitter guy. He escaped with Alexander and instigated the Infinite Crisis, and then he went on to be an incredibly despicable bad guy. Number 4, Doomsday. Doomsday is essentially just pure destruction. He was able to bring down the Justice League and take the life of Earth's premier hero, Superman, in his first appearance. Doomsday doesn't speak, he can't be reasoned with, and the only way to stop him is to beat him harder than he will beat you. That's because Doomsday was created on the planet Krypton as the ultimate life form, tested against that planet's harsh environment and eventually against the Kryptonians themselves. Doomsday's whole life cycle involves it being killed and then coming back stronger than whatever took it out. Over decades and decades that involved literal thousands of repeated deaths, Doomsday essentially became a nearly undefeatable monster with no other thought process beyond destroying everything in front of him and just moving on to the next thing. All he does is punch things to pieces, and the only way to stop him is to try and punch him to pieces however you can before he can punch you to pieces. Number 3, the Maestro Hulk. Maestro is the dystopian future version of the Hulk, the variant of Hulk that haunts his own dreams. He rules over the creatively named city, Dystopia, as an incredibly evil and immoral dictator. Years and years and years of radiation due to the nuclear conflict that spawned this dystopian future had made Maestro sick and villainous, as well as twice as strong as the base level Hulk, but with all the intelligence of Banner to boot. This bearded green behemoth has been a fan favorite character since his introduction in the Future Imperfect storyline, and his backstory, fighting the Human Torch, Doctor Doom, Namor the Submariner, and Abomination, is pretty intense and it's a super fun read. Not to mention his debut where he fights the Incredible Hulk and defeats him like it's absolutely nothing to him. Super cool, you should check it out. Number 2, Vulcan. The third and youngest Summers brother, Gabriel Summers, has been used by multiple different parties since his birth. His mother, Catherine Summers, had her life taken by the Shi'ar Emperor Deken as a punishment for his father, Christopher Summers' own actions. He was basically paying for his father's crimes, which sucks. The Shi'ar took Gabriel and artificially aged him up and essentially used him back on Earth. So he was robbed of his childhood, which essentially meant that Vulcan has a tendency to act like a huge brat sometimes. It's a big old baby. After being saved and mentored by Moira McTaggart, Vulcan was drafted into an early team of Professor X's X-Men that got almost completely perished at the hands of Krakoa. Professor X then used his powers to wipe everyone's mind of the memory of this team of X-Men, which was incredibly messed up. Unbeknownst to Xavier though, Vulcan absorbed the energies of his teammates and was actually able to survive, spending years in Earth's orbit just kind of inert and floating there until the events of M-Day awoke him. After coming back and fighting the X-Men and Xavier for some understandable vengeance, Gabriel took off into space and essentially took control of the Shi'ar Empire, marrying the black sheep of the Shi'ar royal family and using his massive power to beat the royal guard, take the life of Deken, and place himself on the throne. And finally, in at number 1, it's Thanos. Look, I know we all love Thanos as a villain. He's terribly ruthless, massively intelligent, and sickeningly powerful. But my lord, is his origin messed up. Thanos was born on Titan, a moon of Saturn, and is technically an Eternal. Unfortunately though, Thanos was born with a deviant gene, which made him very different looking from the rest of the Titan Eternals, with purple thick hide-like skin and a much larger body. These differences caused Thanos' mom to try and change his life status from alive to lights out, and when that failed, he was ruthlessly bullied as he grew up. As such, Thanos wasn't the happiest child, and he distanced himself from his society, instead investing himself in science, life and death, and he also started dissecting animals all Dahmer-like. Thanos found he has a thing for death. In fact, he met and started to fall in love with the literal physical embodiment of death in Marvel Comics, Mistress Death. To prove his love for her, he would commit some of the worst crimes, starting with the dissection of his mom, the bombardment of his home world, and eventually assembling the Infinity Stones and trying to wield the Cosmic Cube to destroy all life in the universe.
At number 10 is Calendar Man. So you think you've heard all the villain origin stories, huh? Well, have you ever met Julian Day, the Calendar Man? This guy's obsession with time and dates would make even the most punctual person seem laid back. He'd celebrate holidays like nobody's business, but his calendar fixation led to some serious mental unraveling. You see, he dabbled in a life of crime with a unique twist, pulling off heists tied to specific calendar dates. Batman, being the Caped Crusader he is, couldn't resist, and the two engaged in an ongoing dance of cat and mouse. But here's the twist: after some stints in Arkham Asylum, Julian somehow became a useful asset to Batman. He helped him crack the case of the Holiday Unaliver, a case that the Calendar Man himself was initially the prime suspect for. Nowadays, Julian's obsession has evolved into metahuman abilities, as he ages and regenerates with the seasons. Winter brings wrinkles, and spring, well, it's like a youth serum, turning him into a newer, younger version of himself. Just goes to show even the weirdest obsessions can lead to some unexpected supervillain stories. At number 9 is Ice Cream. So if you haven't heard of him, Ice Cream is a minor villain who only appeared in the Obnoxio the Clown #1 X-Men comic. Ice Cream is a mutant supervillain with the power to turn his entire body into any flavor of ice cream. That's right. In his ice cream form, he can change his shape, melting into a puddle to slip under a door. His costume is made of unstable molecules, so it can turn into ice cream along with him and then change back. His origin story is that people laughed at him because of his ridiculous powers, and he blamed the X-Men because their incredible powers made his look ridiculous in comparison. So he made a plan to destroy them so that everyone would respect him. He also made ice cream puns like lickety banana split and easy as pie a la mode, and at one point he even said curses like a typical cartoon villain. If you're enjoying the video so far, please support the channel by pressing like, subscribing to Top 10 Nerd, and ringing that notification bell. At number 8 is the Rainbow Rider. Roy G. Bivolo, aka the Rainbow Rider was not your typical comic book villain. Growing up, Roy had dreams of becoming a famous artist, but there's a catch. He was colorblind. While other kids were out playing, Roy spent his time perfecting his craft, only to be met with disdain for his art due to his inability to see the true beauty of colors. But Roy's story takes an even darker turn. His father, an optometrist and optical tech expert, vowed to find a way to cure his son's condition. Tragically, he passed away before he could fulfill that promise. But before he could, Roy's father handed him a pair of goggles that he had been developing. These goggles had the power to emit solid rainbow-colored light beams, which kind of misses the target a little bit. Fueled by bitterness over his failed artistic pursuits and his father's unfulfilled promise, Roy chose a different path. He embarked on a life of crime, using the goggles to create chaos and establish himself as the Rainbow Raider. At number 7 is Shaggy Man. No, it's not Shaggy from Scooby-Doo, although I wish it was. This guy was actually a freaky creation of Dr. Andrew Zagarian, who was just trying to find a substitute for lost human tissue. He whipped up something called plast alloy and decided to beef it up with a dash of salamander DNA. But here's where everything goes south for science. A big old human error occurred, and this artificial body he was working on turned into a hulking hairy giant he cleverly named the Shaggy Man. No PhD required to see where this is going. The Shaggy Man goes bonkers, attacking anything that moves. Plus, it can regrow any body part that it loses thanks to its salamander DNA. The Doctor was in way over his head and had to call in the Justice League for backup. But even then, those superheroes couldn't handle this monstrosity. But leave it to the Flash to come up with a genius solution. He tells the Doctor to create another Shaggy Man, and then they toss these immortal beasts into a deep pit where they're stuck battling each other for all eternity. At number 6 is Victoria Murdoch. The villainess known as the Asbestos Lady had a burning grudge against the original Human Torch. To face the fiery hero, she decided to deck herself out in a fireproof asbestos suit, making her nearly invincible to the Human Torch. But she craved more power and tried to strong-arm her scientist friend Fred Raymond into enhancing her asbestos abilities. The Torch kept a close eye on Raymond's home and thwarted her plans. Fueled by revenge, the Asbestos Lady caused a train wreck to off the Raymonds, but their son Thomas survived unscathed. She tracked his fire-resistant talents as he joined a circus act, but again, the Torch foiled her plans by melting her boots to the road. Then in 1947, her twin brother Murdoch met his end at the hands of the Torch and Toro. Asbestos Lady resolved to wipe them out, as she lured them into traps, inducing an asbestos-lined net, but they survived. But despite her escape attempts and alliances with villains, the Asbestos Lady ended up behind bars, vowing vengeance. However, she eventually succumbed to mesothelioma, probably due to all that asbestos exposure. At number 5 is Fred Myers, the Boomerang Man. Have you ever heard of a villain who started off as a pro baseball player? No? Well, let me introduce you to Boomerang, aka Fred Myers. He's not your typical bad guy. You see, back in the day, he was swinging for the fences in the baseball world. But then he got suspended for taking bribes. That's right, he went from hitting home runs to hitting people. But wait, it gets crazier. A criminal organization came knocking on his door, and Fred joined the dark side as an assassin. He worked for some big names like Justin Hammer, the Kingpin, the Masters of Evil, and even the Sinister 12. Then he had a brief stint as a hero during the Marvel Universe Civil War, going by the name Outback. But of course, he couldn't resist the allure of the criminal life for long. Now he's a part of the Thunderbolts, a team of reformed supervillains. Boomerang's not just any run-of-the-mill bad guy either. He's a sharpshooter with a lethal arsenal of customized boomerangs, from explosives to tear gas. So the next time you see a baseball game, remember that not all athletes stick to playing fair. At number 4 is Leapfrog. An unusual and relatively obscure villain in the Marvel Universe, offers not one but two intriguing origin stories. First, we have Vincent Petilio, a struggling inventor who decided to take matters into his own hands. Frustrated with his lack of success, he crafted a frog-like suit equipped with electric leaping coils. Sadly for him, Daredevil foiled his criminal aspirations not once but twice, and later Iron Man joined the party, ensuring Petilio's stint in jail. Fast forward to post-prison life, where financial hardship followed the tragic loss of Petilio's wife to cancer. His son Eugene took up the mantle as Frogman, causing some father-son superhero drama. But then when the villainous White Rabbit resurfaced, Betelio went undercover to help the police, leading to a unique family showdown against the White Rabbit. Next was talk about Buford Lang, a bad dad who stumbled into a leapfrog costume. His encounter with Daredevil at a rooftop took a shocking twist involving his own son Timmy, who didn't want to see Daredevil hurt. This electrifying turn of events led to Lang's unfortunate demise until he was eventually resurrected, of course. This is comic books. At number 3, meet the Sultan of Sauce, the Condiment King. If you've seen the Lego Batman movie or the Harley Quinn animated series, you've encountered this master of salvary savagery. In the Lego movie spin-off, he joined the Joker's gang attacking Gotham, and in Harley Quinn, he's Poison Ivy's Kite Man rival. Yup, the Condiment King is a real DC villain, though he's not exactly keeping Batman up at night. Batman the Animated Series introduced him where he fell under Joker's control, who made him wield condiments as weapons. Before his spicy turn, he was Buddy Sandler, a comedian brainwashed by the Joker to threaten people with ketchup and mustard at a fancy restaurant. In the comics, his real name was Michelle Mayo, a name that doesn't exactly command respect. But in Birds of Prey number 37, he concocted a poison that sent Blue Beetle, Black Canary, and Robin into anaphylactic shock. Deliciously evil, am I right? At number 2, Clock King's comic history is a curious tale of obscurity turned cool. See, back in the 1960s, he made his debut in the world's finest comics number 111, a crook who really loved clocks. And well, that's about it. Over the next 2 decades, he only popped up a couple more times in some of the world's finest backup stories. One of those tried to give him a backup story, but it was really only a half-hearted attempt at best. However, the 1980s came to the rescue with the creation of the Injustice Gang. This group of largely forgotten villains, formed for laughs in the Justice League comics, breathed new life into characters like Clock King. But the real turning point for him was Batman the Animated Series. See, they took this obscure clock-loving crook and turned him into something awesome. The updated designs and new motivations struck a chord with fans, and suddenly, the Clock King was vogue. At number 1 is Polka Dot Man. His mom was a scientist obsessed with superheroes, and she decided to take a leap into the unknown. See, she worked at Star Labs, and in her quest to turn her kids into caped crusaders, she exposed Abner to an interdimensional virus. Now what happened next is something like out of a horror sci-fi flick. See, Abner's skin starts sprouting these weird glowing polka dots and lumps, and it's not a fashion statement. Some of his siblings, they didn't make it. They paid the price for their mom's experiments, but Abner, well, he survived, but at a cost. He had to expel those polka dots twice daily just to prevent the virus from munching on his insides. Now what's more is because of his mom's twisted experiments, Abner got PTSD. He sees his mom's face in every person he looks at, like an unending horror show in his head. And while he might not be too fond of unaliving people, he's got a twisted way to motivate himself. See, he imagines his targets as his own mother. Eventually, he ended up behind bars in Belle Reve Penitentiary. But he would eventually go on to be recruited by Amanda Waller as part of a new squad, and I'm sure you all know the rest.
A number of villains were created specifically for the 1966 Batman show, Egghead being one of them. He is an egotistical, egg-obsessed man whose brain is too big for his head, which is why it's so long. This man is pretty exceptional. He was a professor at Gotham Academy. He eventually turned to a life of crime, working with the likes of the Riddler. It's unclear why he stepped into villainhood. Maybe one day he just cracked. During his villain activities, he met a woman and fell in love, but she didn't want to marry until Egghead was better off financially, so he hatched a plan to take over the city. This did not go over easy for him, and he was foiled by Batman. He later tried to hatch a dinosaur, which Batman did not let that slide and defeated him again. He's gone from the screen to the page to the big screen in various cameos. Egghead is one of the only villains to figure out that Bruce Wayne is Batman. Due to the enormous expense of the heroes, he used clues about Batman's mannerisms to make the connection. One of my personal irrational fears is that my atoms and whatever I'm currently touching's atoms will line up perfectly and I will be painfully fused into whatever that thing is. In our world, I know that's not scientifically possible, but in the Marvel universe, it seems to be. Maybe. In Spidey's Super Stories 8, Spider-Man encounters a man fused with a wall, making him the Wall. He was a regular kid until an accident at work permanently altered his being. The accident being an entire brick wall coming crashing down on him. It's not really explained how he fuses with the bricks, but the only semi-plausible reason I can think of is their atoms lining up, which hopefully they'll line up again and he can be freed. We only see him in Spidey stories, but he was based on a character created for the Electric Company TV show. The Spidey super stories and the show went hand in hand. The show was designed to entice kids to practice speech and writing, as were the Spidey comics. Marvel provided Spidey to the channel for free, and he wasn't the only big name there. Morgan Freeman and Rita Moreno starred as well. As for the Wall, we don't see him again until a profile on the Marvel Strike Force website goes up. Batman's valet, Alfred, is a saint and deserves nothing but good things, so why did the creators of Detective Comics feel the need to crush him with a boulder, have his body kidnapped and experimented on, and brought back to life Frankenstein style, turning him into a villain wanting to kill his family? I don't get it. After the experiments are done on his near-dead body, his mind and body have been twisted into reverse, so all the love he felt for Batman and Robin is now hatred for Batman and Robin. The Outsider is a physically separate being from Alfred. Alfred is stuck in a coma-like state. In the final battle between the Outsider and Batman and Robin, Batman figures out how to get Alfred back to normal. The unfortunate part is that the Outsider is still inside Alfred and every once in a while comes out again. Marvel creates some interesting characters, like an elf hitman. His name is Melf, M-E-L-F, but his alias is Elf with a Gun, and that's it, that's what he is. It seems that he's part of a bigger group, Elves with Guns. We don't know where he's from officially, but the Elves with Guns are agents for the Tribunals, a force dedicated to preserving order in the universe. Melf was a weird guy. He would go around offing random people and he was never caught. He was only stopped because he was run over by a truck. His nephew Ralph then took up his undisclosed mission. However, if we look at him like he was working for the Tribunals, then maybe his victims weren't as random. This would be a great and easy to follow explanation for everything, which is why it has been disproven. Turns out the Tribunals were fake, and we are once again back to wondering why a killer elf was roaming the streets. The Phantom Stranger has led a lot of lives, literally. One might be canon now, but it's only a matter of time before someone else grabs a pen and messes with his history. His current origin in the New 52 story is that he was Judas, betrayer of Jesus, and that makes him one of the greatest sinners that has ever lived. Another is that he was a fallen angel who didn't pick a side during the Heavenly War. Another is that he was Isaac from the Bible story. Not exactly the same though. This time his son died because King Herod was looking for Jesus, and now Isaac hates Jesus and later him. Another is that he was spared during biblical times but didn't want to be, but the angels didn't want to let him in heaven, so he has to walk the earth alone forever. And the fourth is that he was actually one of the last remaining parts of our previous universe. At the final curtain, he approaches those studying the end and passes a part of himself onto a new person, so when the universe is reborn, they get a Phantom Stranger too. In addition to his many backstories, it is also up in the air as to whether or not he is a villain. To me, I think he started out as a villain. He did betray Jesus in at least a few of these, but later realized the error of his ways and became a sort of hero. Lots of people just choose to ignore many New 52 storylines, so I guess we'll just have to wait and see what sticks for Phantom. Phantom Stranger is now connected to a villain called Question, but that wasn't always the case. Question at one point was a character that was thought to be a supernatural power, thought to be because it was never made clear. One of the only things that is now considered canon about him is that he has committed a crime bad enough to be considered one of 3 of the world's greatest sinners, part of the trio of sin with Phantom. We never know this guy's name. Before being turned into Question, the guy was obsessed with power and having his name feared by all. As his punishment, he got his face taken away and he can no longer remember himself or his name. This was introduced in the New 52. Before that, he was just an alter ego of Vic Sage, but then Flashpoint caused them to separate and even have a brand new different history thing going on. This version of him isn't that bad. He just really wants to know who he is. He also shares a name with a Taylor Swift song. It's all very confusing. I am hoping that we will eventually get a name reveal out of him, whether he's another universe version of an existing Marvel villain, or if he's really a historical figure. Identity theft and retcons have led to quite a confusing backstory for Zorn. Zorn's debut was in New X-Men Annual 2001, and at the end, he was revealed to be Magneto in disguise. Only he wasn't. Later, it was revealed that it was actually Zorn pretending to be Magneto, pretending to be Zorn, and Zorn was being controlled by someone named Sublime to to foster mutant hatred in the world. Easy to follow. At the end of the Magneto identity theft fight, Zorn dies, but not really. His body is done for, but his essence was still around through his connection to Sublime, so he came back. The creator of Zorn in 2001 always intended for Zorn to be Magneto, actually Magneto, so when you read the story there are hints to it the whole way through. It was because the editors liked Zorn's character, and Marvel wanted Magneto alive so they could use him again, that the confusing aspect of his story was born. Zorn also has a twin brother with very similar powers to him, so sometimes Zorn returns but it's Zorn 1, or it's not Zorn 1 and it's actually Zorn 2, it's a whole thing. Duella Dent's origin is confusing because she wants it to be. She is a pathological liar when it comes to her family tree. She is claimed to be the daughter of the Joker, Catwoman, the Riddler, the Penguin, Scarecrow, and Two-Face, and even more. She was first introduced as the Joker's daughter, but her last name is Dent, the same name belonging to Harvey Dent, or Two-Face. So now she is known as Two-Face's daughter for a while, until Robin figures out she's not the right age to be his daughter. She agrees and then just disappears. She appeared in the Teen Titans comic series, and she was planned to be revealed as a time traveler that gets reality warped one too many times and is driven insane. Unfortunately, we never got to see this as the comics were cancelled. Technically, Duella doesn't want to be a villain, but she does fight a lot of heroes and lies all the time. She was later revealed to actually legit be the daughter of another universe Joker and Three-Face, a female variation of Two-Face. Is this a lie? Maybe. You can literally never know what's real in these universes anymore. Turns out, neither can Duella. It's suggested that because her mind was warped so much, every time she switched Earths, her consciousness switches slightly as well, which is why she's named so many different parents. She was just confused. The Joker is one of the most iconic villains of all time, so it's no wonder so many people want to leave their mark on his story. Unfortunately, that makes for a pretty messed up, twisted, confusing history. One thing is common: he ends up in acid and comes out looking like that. Who he was before, and even during the swim, is up to whoever is holding the pen. In 1951's Detective Comics 168, the Joker had been the Red Hood, also a criminal, and one night he decided to rob a factory. He escaped by swimming through the pool of chemical wastes, and I genuinely think he thought he would come out normal. He didn't, and to his delight figured out his new look was scary and used it to his advantage. In later versions, like The Killing Joke in 1988, he is a failing comedian and once again finds himself in the chemical factory, but this time he gets scared into the acid. In Batman the Animated Series, he was a hitman first. In the very recent and Oscar-worthy interpretation from Joaquin Phoenix is that he didn't fall in the acid yet. His look is just makeup, and he has a neurological disorder that makes him randomly laugh. There is another movie coming up with Lady Gaga as Harley, so maybe the acid will make an appearance then too. Time for the big guy, the MCU's newest big bad wolf and my never-ending headache, Kang the Conqueror. One thing seems to generally stay consistent: every version of Kang starts out as Nathaniel Richards. Where Nathaniel comes from? We have options. There was a Nathaniel from Earth 616 that brought peace to Earth 6311 when he traveled there. This made him a big deal. He was known as the legendary benefactor, but he wasn't the Nathaniel native to the planet, so another Nathaniel was eventually born. This Nathaniel was maybe descended from the great benefactor himself, or Dr. Doom. This Nathaniel's history was messed up by another him, causing him to be a good guy for a while. Nathaniel grows up and is bored, so he travels back in time to Earth 616's ancient Egypt. His plans? Be king. Eventually he tries to return home after losing some fights, but is caught in a time storm and transported ahead to the 40th century Earth 6311. The future is a mess, they are at war again, and the people have regressed into barbarians. Nathaniel has found the perfect group to take over. This is the first time he takes on the name Kang the Conqueror. He took his name and ran, conquering Earth 6311, that galaxy, and then trying to attack Earth 616. He wanted more power, but there was also a historical record that said that eventually a celestial Madonna was going to give birth to the most powerful entity ever, and Kang wanted to be their dad. This was the confusing origin of one version of Kang, but generally considered to be the base Kang, kind of. There are so many versions of him under a variety of names: Nathaniel, Kang, Immortus, Scarlet Centurion, Victor Timely, Mr. Griffin, Prime Kang, and Kang the Conglomerator.
At number 10 is Black Bolt. Black Bolt, aka Blackagar Boltagon, yup, that's his actual name, had an undeniably tough start. Exposed to the Terrigen mists while still in the womb, he gained a staggering power. A voice capable of toppling buildings and even obliterating entire worlds. His arrival into the world wasn't subtle. His mere cries crumbled the structure around him when he was born. But from the moment of birth, Black Bolt was treated not as a person, but as a weapon of mass destruction. Isolation was his fate until the age of 19, and he was forbidden to utter a single word due to his uncontrollable power, spending the first 2 decades of his life in absolute silence. Now let's take a moment here to appreciate the image of a grown Black Bolt decked out in a superhero outfit sitting in his isolation chamber. I mean, come on dude, casual attire is an option. I mean, even the Joker doesn't wear purple at the Arkham Asylum. If you're enjoying this video so far, you can support this channel by pressing like, subscribing to Top 10 Nerd, and ringing that notification bell. Really appreciate it. At number 9 is Rorschach. Rorschach's backstory reads like a descent into a nightmarish abyss. A childhood entrenched in squalor, with a mother who lived a life of night walking set the tone for his grim trajectory. Bullied at school, Rorschach's retaliation marked his entry into the world of crime. But it was a chance encounter with a shifting, enigmatic dress that catalyzed his transformation. Crafting his ink-blotted mask, he embraced the persona of Rorschach. In the world of vigilantism, he crossed paths with Night Owl and the other Watchmen, but a horrifying case left an indelible scar. Investigating a girl's abduction, he stumbled upon an unspeakable brutality. Her remains had been fed to dogs. His retribution was unflinching, handcuffing the perpetrator amidst flames, and a gruesome ultimatum pushed the boundaries of his morality. As time went on, the line between Rorschach and Walter Korvax blurred. His mask became his face, obscuring his true self. In a twisted metamorphosis, Korvax perished and Rorschach emerged. This brutal origin story epitomizes the haunting complexity of Watchmen's characters, where darkness begets something darker. At number 8 is Red Hood. The only thing more tragic than Jason Todd's backstory is the fact that the decision to end his character was the result of a vote by fans via telephone poll. Born into Gotham and raised as the second ever Robin to Bruce's Batman, Todd's journey into heroism wasn't paved by rose petals. He met a tragic fate at the hands of the Joker when Batman's notorious nemesis whacked him mercilessly with a crowbar and left him strapped next to a bomb. Todd's demise marked the stark divergence from your typical heroic tragedy. Miraculously surviving his grim fate via some mystic shenanigans, probably involving the Lazarus Pit, he returned with a newfound edginess, embracing a more anti-hero persona as the Red Hood, which, by the way, is the Joker's original moniker. This gritty transformation challenges the traditional archetype of a superhero, delving into the complexities of vengeance, morality, and blurred lines. It seems that the darkest of beginnings can give rise to the extraordinary, if not unconventional, champions. At number 7 is Spider-Man. Spider-Man's origin story is a gripping tale of tragedy and transformation. Orphaned at an early age, he was raised by his Uncle Ben and Aunt May, growing up with a resilient spirit despite being bullied for his intellect and physicality. The twist, however, arrives when a radioactive spider bite grants him superpowers, turning Peter Parker into the friendly neighborhood Spider-Man. But the heart-wrenching moments don't stop there. The weight of responsibility intensifies when Uncle Ben is eliminated, largely due to Peter's inaction. See, because he got ripped off after winning his wrestling gig, he didn't mind when the place got robbed. Not until the robber went on to pew-pew his uncle in the street outside. This shattering loss becomes a driving force, propelling Spider-Man to navigate his dual life of newfound gravity. The web-slinger evolves from a carefree teen to a vigilant guardian, learning that great power demands great responsibility. At number 6, Daredevil. Daredevil, the man without fear, but with a lot of misfortune. Meet Matt Murdock. Picture a young Murdock full of good intentions attempting to save a pedestrian, but fate had other plans for him. At this moment, a radioactive substance blinds him. Not exactly a radioactive spider bite, but hey, it's Marvel. And then it gets even darker. His dad, just a hardworking boxer, ends up in the crosshairs of some ruthless gangsters. Murdock Sr. takes the fall, leading young Matt down a path of vengeance. But then it gets even worse. His love interest, Karen Page, she takes a dark turn too, selling out Daredevil's secret identity while under the influence, only then to be by the sadistically accurate Bullseye. Ouch. So here's Daredevil's origin in a nutshell. Blinded, avenging his father, dealing with loss, and grappling with betrayal. No wonder the guy's got issues. His life is like a masterclass in tragic backstories. At number 5 is The Flash. You know, when it comes to superhero origin stories, we often expect a certain level of tragedy. But Barry Allen's tale took an unexpected twist. You see, back in the day, his mother's fate wasn't the driving force behind his superhero persona. No, she was just in a coma for a little while. But then crisis Crisis on Infinite Earths happened, things got shifted around, and suddenly, Barry's life became a roller coaster of sorrow. Enter Flash Rebirth, where the writers decided, hey, let's pile on that trauma. Now, Nora, Barry's mom, didn't just fade away quietly. No, she was brutally... And guess who's to blame? Yup, his own dad. Imagine that. But the plot gets even juicier, as we can all blame the time-meddling antics of Eobard Thawne, aka Reverse Flash. This guy goes back in time, torches Barry's home, and impales Nora, all just to mess with Barry's head. Talk about holding a grudge across timelines. It's like a soap opera with capes. At number 4 is Wolverine. Wolverine's origin story is like a psychological roller coaster that you wouldn't wish on your worst enemy. The dude's life is a series of unfortunate events that would make Lemony Snicket's eyebrows raise in surprise. Imagine being a sickly kid only to have your mutation pop up right after your real dad eliminates your foster dad. Then in a fit of rage-fueled vengeance, you off your biological father, leading your mom to think, oh, that's it for me, and take her own exit. Our angsty protagonist bolts with his buddy Rose, hoping to catch a breather. Just your regular tale of friendship and healing, right? Wrong. Cue his half-brother's dramatic entrance and oops, Logan's blades accidentally find their way into poor old Rose. I mean, come on, talk about life kicking you when you're down. At number 3 is Silver Surfer, a character steeped in cosmic tragedy. Norrin Rad, hailing from the planet Zen-La, has an origin that's nothing short of gut-wrenching. Forced by the cosmic juggernaut Galactus, who thrives on consuming entire worlds, Rad becomes Galactus' herald. This means sourcing the cosmos for energy-rich planets to satisfy his master's insatiable hunger. At first, it doesn't seem too terrible, just avoid planets with intelligent life, right? But such planets are rare, and as guilt piles up leading Galactus to inhabited worlds, the Silver Surfer's sanity begins to fray. Galactus, recognizing this, stifles Rad's emotions, reducing him to a mere husk. Imagine being shackled to his cosmic master's whims, his vibrant self buried under cosmic servitude. It's a tale of sacrifice, remorse, and the battle for identity woven into the fabric of the universe. At number 2, the Incredible Hulk. When we delve into the origin story of the Hulk, the surface level equation of Bruce Banner plus gamma radiation might seem straightforward, but the story goes much deeper. Sure, exposure to gamma radiation plays a pivotal role in his transformation, but why the emotional roller coaster once he's green? The answer is as complex as Bruce's psyche. Unraveling the threads leads us to Bruce's tumultuous past and the haunting figure of his father, Brian. Brian Banner's exposure to gamma radiation triggered a genetic alteration that echoed down the family tree, affecting Bruce as well. Yet it's not just the altered genes that shaped the Hulk's fury. Brian wasn't just a victim of radiation, he was a tormentor and abuser. He was a tormentor. His malevolent actions scarred Bruce's childhood. The emotional turmoil and the inability to control his anger stem from these deep-rooted traumas. The Hulk isn't just a product of scientific mishaps, it's the manifestation of the interplay between genetics and psychological wounds. A stark reminder that our origins can't be boiled down to a simple formula. And at number 1, Batman. Batman, the very mention of his name conjures up thoughts of darkness, brooding nights, and a city in need of a savior. But peel back the layers of his iconic persona and you'll uncover a profoundly tragic origin story that's etched into the annals of pop culture history and into every single one of his movies. Picture this, a young Bruce Wayne, innocent and wide-eyed, out for a faithful night with his parents. Suddenly, tragedy strikes in the form of a dark alley and the chilling sound of pew pew pew. His parents, pillars of hope, fall before his eyes, victim of this heartless act. The impact of that moment is immeasurable, and it carves a permanent scar in his soul. Now, despite being left with wealth beyond measure, despite being left with wealth beyond measure and a loyal butler in the name of Alfred, Bruce is burdened with unrelenting emptiness. His life goal becomes an unending quest to rid Gotham of its malevolent underbelly, driven by an unwavering desire for justice and vengeance. The Bat was born from the ashes of that night, a symbol of the darkness that took so much from him and the light he aims to restore, proving that even in the harshest crucibles of fate, heroes can emerge with unyielding strength and unwavering determination. These stories serve as a testament to the resilience of the human spirit, the capacity to endure unfathomable suffering, and the power to transform adversity into inspiration. So the next time you witness a superhero soaring through the skies, just remember the incredible journeys that led them there. Journeys that we can hardly believe happened.